Chapter 5:17. There was a muffled boom. All the snowflakes on the bridge began to madly dance, surging forward along with the temple sword. Countless snowflakes fell, and all Chun Chongqing could see was a vast expanse of white. He could see nothing, only sense the terrifying power of that sword behind the mist of snow. He felt like he had entered an illusion, that what he faced was not Su Yorong's sword, but an avalanche. The ice and snow that had accumulated on the southern cliff of Holy Maiden Peak for 1,000 years suddenly collapsed, rumbling like thunder as it rushed toward him. No matter how exquisite his sword style was, how could it pierce through this collapsed cliff? The two shores of the Luo River were very quiet. The great ship was even more still. Both Mao Chuyu and Ling Haijiwang were silent. Tang 36's hands were tightly clenched, but he still couldn't help but tremble. Su Moyu's face was somewhat pale, his lips moving as he muttered something. At some point, Zheshio's eyes had turned somewhat red, and the hand that gripped his cane tightened. All of this was because of the mist of snow on the Bridge of Helplessness, and that sword behind the mist of snow. Tang 36 and Su Moyu were well aware that they could not receive this sword. Unless they used their life-saving magical artifacts, they would either be heavily injured, or, and this was Su Yorong's first sword in its truest sense, which also meant that they could not even receive a single sword from her. This fact was somewhat difficult for them to accept, but they had to accept it. Zheshio was different from what they thought, but he had to admit the terror of Su Yorong's sword. Her innate bloodline was truly too powerful. Besides Qiushan Jun's true dragon bloodline and Luolua's white emperor bloodline, who else in the world could contend against her? Even those peak star condensation experts standing at the bow of the ship, only a step away from the divine domain, could not help but admire Su Yorong's talent. It was said that cultivating the Tao was a gift bestowed by the starry sky to intelligent beings, so wasn't Su Yorong this gift itself? But interestingly, even at this moment, even when they saw Su Yorong's powerful sword like an avalanche, no one was worried about Chun Chongqing. Whether it was Tang 36, the people of the Orthodox Academy, or anyone else. Yes, Chun Chongqing's innate bloodline might have been very ordinary, but from Xuanyang City to the capital, the many initial-level star condensation experts that had fallen to his sword had long since proved that he was no ordinary upper-level ethereal opening expert. Su Yorong's sword momentum was like the collapse of a cliff, like the avalanche of snow. Most terrifying of all was still her temple sword that had arrived with the snowstorm. Just like how no matter how fast his sword was, it couldn't be faster than Su Yorong. No matter how strong Su Yorong's sword was, it couldn't directly break through him. He calmed his mind, held the sword horizontally in front of him, and raised it to his eyebrows. His movements were very natural, just like how he had raised his sword 30,000 times in the past 6 months. The horizontal stroke of the sword was a single character. The cliff was firm, the iron chain reappeared, and the dam was firm forever. This was the stupid sword that not even Su Li had been able to learn. The avalanche came. The wind was mournful, and the snowflakes were like arrows. The temple sword, accompanied by wind and snow, heavily struck the stainless sword. This time, when the two swords met, there wasn't a crisp sword cry, but a loud bang. It was as if the gods in the sky were holding an iron hammer and smashing it heavily on an iron chopping board. All the snow on the bridge was blown into the air. The Luo River beneath the bridge rose and fell with it. The temple sword slashed down. An unimaginably majestic energy fell upon the body of the stainless sword. The avalanche of 10,000-year-old snow broke through the seemingly sturdy cliff and rushed into the great river, where it began to incessantly batter against the iron chains and the dam. With an ear-piercing noise, the stainless sword slightly bent. The stupid sword that Chun Chongqing had never broken through ever since he had mastered it actually showed signs of crumbling. He had long since been prepared for this. At some point, his left hand had gripped the vault sheath, and with a clang, the sheath wrapped around the edge of the stainless sword. His left hand gripped the sheath, his right hand gripped the hilt, and he held it horizontally in front of him to receive it. The rumbling continued without end. The torrential rain pounded without end. Clack, clack, clack. The sound of something hard shattering resounded through the snowstorm. In the snowstorm, one could see Chen Chongqing's figure constantly retreating. The snowstorm gradually subsided, the Luo River calmed, and the bridge of helplessness became clear once more. Su Yorong gripped the temple sword and calmly gazed across from her, still saying nothing. On the hard surface of the bridge of helplessness were two distinct ravines. Chen Chongqing stood at the end of these two ravines, his feet sunk in, a pile of gravel piled up behind him. His shoes and pants had been completely shredded, making him look rather wretched. He suddenly began to cough, coughing uncomfortably. It was just one strike. He had suffered internal injuries. The crowd on the two shores of the Luo River could not clearly see what was happening on the bridge. They could only see the sudden explosion of the snowstorm and the dust that followed and countless cries of alarm. The great ship was still quiet. Not even Ling Haijiwang and the others mocked or ridiculed Chen Chongqing, because no matter how wretched he was, whether he was injured or not, he had still received this strike. This was enough. These experts could clearly see that not even an ordinary initial-level star condensation cultivator would be able to receive Su Yorong's great avalanche. This was the terrifying aspect of an innate bloodline. Even if one's cultivation was lower, they could still rely on the quantity of true essence and the strength of their spiritual sense to crush them. Chen Chongqing gazed at Su Yorong, his gaze falling upon that white gauze. As expected, he still could not see through it. He could not see through her. He knew that Su Yorong was very strong, but he had not imagined that this young girl, who gave off an elegant and refined feeling, would be powerful to this extent. She had even surpassed the boundaries of tyranny, faintly possessing the aura of a king. Was the phoenix truly a natural king? He had experienced their battle in the plains of the unsetting sun and the conversation of cultivators in the snowy temple. He had once believed that someone like Lady Chu Jian was already the most talented of cultivators, and that Su Yorong would, at most, be on par with her. But now it seemed that she was even stronger than Lady Chu Jian. Su Yorong slowly walked through the snowstorm, her right hand casually holding the temple sword. She was like a fairy descending from the clouds. It was very difficult to associate her with that terrifying avalanche strike from before. The calmer and more indifferent she was, the easier it was for others to feel that she was undefeatable. How could he defeat such a powerful opponent? Chen Chongqing had pondered this question for many days, prepared for 7 whole days. There was a light clack on the bridge of helplessness. The stainless sword was inserted into the sheath. It was not being sheathed, but rather that the hilt and sheath were connected, so it naturally could not hide its edge. On the contrary, the blade suddenly elongated, revealing its edge. When he was facing Zhu Luo in Xuanyang City, he had done this as a form of respect to his favorite senior Yu Ren and Wang Po, and also as a form of respect to her in the snowstorm. A sword intent appeared on the bridge of helplessness in the snowstorm. The appearance of this sword intent was very sudden, but there was nothing strange about it. On the contrary, it seemed especially open and aboveboard, as it should be, giving off an upright feeling. This sword intent was very straight, very direct. This sword intent was very hot, very fervent. I will do my best to write a bit more tonight, but the update will truly be very late into the night. Everyone, there is no need to wait. Chapter 5:18. This sword is rather unusual. As he stood at the bow of the ship and gazed at the stone bridge a li away, sensing the sword intent, Ling Haijiwang's expressionless face finally began to show some signs of change. Daoist Siyuan replied, Principal Shang's disciple is naturally unusual. The sword intent Chen Chongqing had released was very powerful, but it was not enough to shock powerful experts of their level. The change in his emotions stemmed from the two meanings fused into the sword intent. This sword intent was very hot. Chen Chongqing was well aware that whether it was the quantity of true essence or the strength of his spiritual sense, he was far inferior to Su Yorong, who possessed the bloodline of the true phoenix. Thus, he immediately ignited the fire in his heart. This battle had just begun, and he had not even truly used his sword. If he did use it, he would definitely use his strongest sword. A strand of spiritual sense fell on the 10,000 li of snowy plains outside his ethereal palace, and the snowy plains simultaneously began to burn. The bridge of helplessness also began to burn. Not a single flame could be seen, but one could feel the temperature rise. In an instant, the snowflakes descending on his body melted, transforming into water in the air, and splashing onto his body and the bridge, washing away all the snow that had been on his body. This sword intent was very straight, somewhat similar to the sword he had used to block Su Yorong's great avalanche, but it was even straighter. It was not a cliff or a river bank, but a straight line. Because it was straight, it was unyielding. The stainless sword was still in his hand, but the wind and snow on the bridge of helplessness were already frozen in the air, a straight line appearing in the middle of the bridge. This line had divided the bridge of helplessness into two completely different worlds. He was on this side, Su Yorong was on that side. The rain was on this side, the snow on that side. A sword intent enveloped the stone bridge, scattering the rain and snow. Chen Chongqing raised the stainless sword, his eyes calm and determined. This was the first time he had tried to burn his true essence so violently after learning the blazing sword from Su Li, but the amount of true essence and power contained in this strike were still inferior to Su Yorong's great avalanche. However, his sword strike was filled with even more energy, concentration, and sharpness. Mao Chuyu suddenly took a step to the bow of the ship. As he gazed at the distant bridge, he frowned in disbelief. "Why does it feel a little like Wang Po's path of the blade?" Tang 36 replied, "It is Wang Po's path of the blade." When he said this, his expression was very solemn. Previously, he had said that this battle would only determine victory and defeat, and had nothing to do with life and death, so he didn't really care. However, at this moment, looking at Chen Chongqing's sword essence, he began to lose confidence in his own judgment, and then began to feel uneasy. When the people standing at the bow of the ship heard Mao Chuyu and Tang 36's words, they were somewhat shocked, and then they very naturally thought of that battle in the rain in Xuanyang City. As for Shui He, who also used a blade, his emotions were even more complex. He stared at the bridge of helplessness with an extremely focused gaze, not wanting to miss a single detail. Su Shiji expressionlessly said, "This kid is really lucky to have the opportunity to learn from so many experts. This has nothing to do with luck." Mao Chuyu said with a grave expression, "To learn Wang Po's path of the blade, one must walk on his path of the blade. This is not something that just anyone can do." This statement was correct. Previously, Chen Chongqing had used the sword style of South Stream Temple to execute the descent of heavenly music. It could be said that he was knowledgeable, and with the assistance of the orthodoxy, he had many fortuitous encounters on the path of cultivating the sword. However, it was not that simple to learn Wang Po's saber Dao. He had to believe in Wang Po's path of the blade, so he had to practice it without the slightest hesitation. And this was precisely the reason for Tang 36's concern. Wang Po's path of the blade rested on the word straight. No matter how powerful the enemy before the blade was, even if it was an expert that was impossible to defeat, the hand gripping the blade had to be steady, the edge of the blade had to be straight. To achieve this, the heart of the wielder of the blade had to be as straight as the edge of the blade. That rather shabby middle-aged man had used his countless battles in Tianliang County, in the Wenshui Tangs, in Scholatry Manor of the South, and in Xuanyang City to prove this point. The bow of the ship was silent. Those experts whose cultivations far surpassed Chen Chongqing's asked themselves if they could walk on Wang Po's path of the blade. In the end, they could only give a negative answer. On the bridge of helplessness, Chen Chongqing had not even unsheathed his sword, but his sword intent had already appeared. The snowflakes descending from the sky transformed into raindrops, weaving into a curtain of rain that shattered one by one. The shattered raindrops that were closer to him completely evaporated into mist, enveloping his body within. Su Yorong stood in the snow, her eyes slightly apprehensive as she revealed a grave expression. The white gauze covered her face and the rain and mist obstructed her vision, but it did not affect her perception of this sword intent. She was keenly aware that if she walked over that line in the middle of the bridge of helplessness, she would be greeted by Chen Chongqing's unreserved, most powerful sword. This sword would assuredly decide victory and defeat. Of course, she could also continue to stand in the snow and wait for the changes that might occur later on. But this could also mean that Chen Chongqing could raise his sword intent to an even more terrifying level. If he could do it, Chen Chongqing unreservedly ignited his true essence, using Wang Po's merciless path of the blade to draw a clear path on the bridge of helplessness in the snow and wind. He had drawn a path for this battle. He was letting Su Yorong choose. The white gauze fluttered. Su Yorong closed her eyes. Then, she opened her eyes again. Opening and closing her eyes was a matter of moments. In this moment, she had already made her choice. The Luo River beneath the bridge, constantly receiving snowflakes and drizzle, lightly swayed. The large ship in the distance was also swaying. The painter from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, standing at the very front of the ship, suddenly swayed. The expressions of the other two painters from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets also changed. Then, their voices trembled with shock and unease. "It's that sword? Is it going to end so quickly?" The three painters were all at the star condensation realm. They were not the strongest people present, but they had watched and recorded countless famous battles. They were the most sensitive to the changes in battle, so they were the first to understand what had happened. Soon after, Mao Chuyu, Dao Siyuan, and the others also understood. The Luo River was deathly still. All this was because the girl on the bridge of helplessness had opened her eyes once more. The white gauze fluttered in the wind and snow, but it could not obscure her gaze. Faint golden specks of light floated out of the white gauze. Did those specks of light come from her eyes? The temple sword lightly trembled in the snow. The snowflakes falling on the sword were instantly shaken into nothingness. Half of the bridge of helplessness was snow, the other half was rain and mist. It seemed like it was in the clouds, not in the human world. Su Yorong also seemed like she was no longer in the human world. She was so divine and dignified that even the most ordinary person could sense that her body possessed a strength that already surpassed the limits of the mortal world. Mao Chuyu, Daoist Siyuan, and Ling Haijiwang revealed expressions of disbelief as they simultaneously said in trembling voices, "The Sword of Great Light?" Chapter 519. When the three painters from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets cried out in alarm, many people on the ship guessed at what sword Su Yorong was using, but because they were too shocked, they did not dare to believe it. Only when they heard Mao Chuyu and the other two did they finally confirm that it was as they had imagined. A deathly stillness. Only the Luo River gently lapped against the side of the ship. The crowd gazed at the distant stone bridge shrouded in mist and snow, at that fairyland-like scene. They thought in shock, could it be that the Sword of Great Light is about to reappear in the world? Countless years ago, at the beginning of the Orthodoxy's division from north to south, the first holy maiden of the south viewed the monoliths in the mausoleum of books and comprehended the Tao. From autumn to summer, she finally created two great Taoist techniques under the pavilion in front of the divine path. One was said to be the most profound and difficult to understand departing spring, while the other was the legendary Sword of Great Light. The Sword of Great Light possessed a divine aura that transcended the secular world and an unimaginably terrifying might. Together with the Orthodoxy's Scroll of the Harmonious Sun, the White Emperor's Burning Sea Style's seventh move, the Having Blades Heaven Splitter, and the Chun Imperial Clan's Spear Style's Autumn Slaying, they were known as the continent's five great techniques. The harmonious sun scroll comprehended the heavenly Tao and forgot the sea of stars. The burning sea style was tyrannical beyond compare. The having blade slaughtered all living things. The frost spear watched all living things wither in the world. Each had its own Tao, winning in temperament and spirit. But the sword of great light was different. It was more like a sacrifice to the starry sky, a transcendence of the path of the sword. The sword of great light was an unimaginable sword style. It had no specific moves, but was more like the essence of 10,000 swords. The incomparably complex trajectories of starlight were finally displayed in the simplest form. This sword style was both the simplest and the most complex. Each ray of light was a sword, and as the rays traveled between the heavens and earth, they could imitate all living things. As long as one was within the heavens and earth, how could one avoid them? Besides the legendary departing spring and scroll of time, no other profound and incomprehensible techniques could be found in the orthodoxy. Learning them was naturally especially difficult. Practitioners of the sword had to have a clear understanding of the myriad sword styles of the world, and then borrow the temple chi of great light to perfectly combine their understanding of the path of the sword with the orthodox Taoist techniques of the orthodoxy. To learn the sword of great light, one had to borrow the temple chi of great light to comprehend it. Many years ago, Zhou Dufu had charged into Holy Maiden Peak and took away the temple sword, causing the sword to be lost. Hasn't the sword of great light been lost for centuries? The people on the ship looked at the fairyland-like bridge of helplessness, looked at the faintly discernible figure of Su Yorong in the snow, and could not help but let out low cries of shock. Ling Haijiwang said, "The temple sword has reappeared in the world." Only now did the crowd realize that the sword in Su Yorong's hand was the temple sword of South Stream Temple. Soon after, they recalled the rumor that Chen Chongqing had discovered the sword pool in the garden of Zhou and knew that this temple sword had to have been returned to South Stream Temple by the Li Palace. They couldn't help but feel that this matter was rather chaotic. Mou looked at the bridge of helplessness, her willowy eyebrows slightly raised. In order to comprehend the temple sword's divine chi, there was no other method besides time. Back when the temple sword was still at Holy Maiden Peak, not every holy maiden was able to grasp the sword of great light. Those holy maidens who did grasp the sword of great light often had to wait for their cultivation to reach the pinnacle, and only after several decades could they completely comprehend it. She was keenly aware that Su Yorong had only turned 16 last month, and it had only been 7 days since she had obtained the temple sword from the Li Palace, so how had she managed to do this? Just as the people on the ship were shocked speechless, the scene on the bridge changed once more. Countless bright but not dazzling golden rays of light pierced through the snow, illuminating the Luo River and the cold-resistant willow branches on both sides of the bridge. The fairyland instantly became a divine kingdom, and the stone bridge seemed to be the path leading to the divine kingdom. Now there was no longer any doubt. Su Yorong truly was using the sword of great light. The rays of light pierced through the snow. Light and shadow flickered in and out of the snow, creating countless faintly discernible marks. These marks were all sword intents, condensed and unmoving, hidden and unreleased. If the rays of light in the snow came into contact with something, then the countless sword essences would follow the snow and appear in the rain. Although up until now, people had not seen these sword essences turn into real sword moves, they could already faintly feel that there were countless sword moves hidden within. This was the most terrifying aspect of the sword of great light. If Chen Chongqing raised his sword to meet it, those sword intents would transform. Who could destroy the light of the world? If it were an expert like Mao Qiyu or Ling Haijiwang, who was only a step away from the divine domain, they could naturally rely on their vigorous true essence and profound cultivation to forcefully crush and destroy Su Yorong's sword of great light. They only needed to pay a relatively small price. However, Chen Chongqing's cultivation was similar to Su Yorong's, and his quantity of true essence and the strength of his spiritual sense were far inferior. How could he destroy this sword? Of course, since the sword of great light was not a sword of the secular world, one had to pay an enormous price to use it. Even with Su Yorong's heavenly phoenix bloodline, she could only use it once at most. If Chen Chongqing could not destroy this sword of great light, he would assuredly lose. If he could destroy this sword of great light, Su Yorong would assuredly lose. This was precisely why that painter from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets had said those words in shock. Today's battle on the Bridge of Helplessness was the focus of everyone's attention. For the sake of this battle, the common people of the capital had already waited for several months, perhaps even almost 2 years. Was this battle really going to end so quickly? Many people were shocked. Whether it was Mao Chuyu, Linghai Jiwang, or Daoist Siyuan, none of them would allow themselves to be pushed into such a desperate situation so early. Yes, this was a desperate situation. This was the case for both Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong. Victory or defeat was decided by a single sword. Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong were both people who had great confidence in themselves, and confident people would not allow themselves to be forced into this sort of situation. Yet this was what they had done, leaving no path of retreat for themselves. Chen Chongqing used Wang Po's path of the blade to carve out a path on the snowy bridge. Su Yorong had her own path, but she had calmly accepted this path, because they were both in the prime of their youth. Youth did not need to be preserved. There was no need to hide one's weakness, much less hide one's edge. Youth is to force people. Thus, this battle, which had barely begun, had already reached its end. Senior experts like Linghai Jiwang were no longer youthful, and had even forgotten their own youth, so they could not understand. Tang 36 could understand, Su Moyu understood, Prince Chen Lu vaguely understood, and Zheshio understood best, because they were all young. Whether it's Chen Chongqing or Su Yorong, neither of them likes to put on a show for others to see. Tang 36 turned his head to glance at the dense crowd on the two shores of the Luo River and said, "It will end very quickly." At this moment, a cry of alarm suddenly came from below the great ship. The snowy mist on the Bridge of Helplessness madly danced, and the rain and mist suddenly dispersed. Countless rays of light concealed countless sword intents attacked Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing raised his sword and stabbed at a certain place in the snow and rain. There was nothing new about this attack, much less any deeper meaning. Yet the rain and snow on the bridge suddenly stopped. Chapter 520. A sword glow lit up. Compared to the boundless light surging out of the mist and snow on the other side of the bridge, it was so dim and not even worth mentioning. The trajectory the sword drew in the mist and the place it fell in was also so ordinary and unremarkable. Anyone could see that it was a very ordinary sword technique. Yet the moment the edge of the sword rose, the mist drifting down from the sky instantly stopped. Even the boundless light brought about by the temple sword began to recede as it flew towards the stainless sword. The sword of great light had not yet arrived. What came with the mist was sword intent, formless and formless, yet Chen Chongqing had seen through the intent of the temple sword hidden behind the light. Because he used the intellectual sword, he had used an entire 7 days to cleanse his all-seeing eye. He wanted to see the truth. To be able to guess the sword intent hidden in the mist and see the truth that had yet to be discovered did not mean that he could easily break through it. How had he done it? The stainless sword's seemingly casual flick, that sword technique was clearly extremely ordinary, yet it was especially suitable for the current situation. It was like a meticulous painting of flowers and birds. He had seemingly carelessly and casually put down the final stroke, the ink lines so twisted and powerless. Yet, if one looked from a little distance, one would see that it was a plum branch. A casual dot of ink could also be the finishing touch. An ordinary stroke could sometimes make an entire painting come alive. The problem was to find the right time and the right situation to put down that dot of ink. To put down that stroke required countless times of practice and comprehension. Only then could one know where the stroke should be placed and what kind of brush technique should be used. What kind of brush technique was this? What kind of sword was this? A somewhat unconfident voice rose up from below the deck of the great ship. The small sword of the plum hut? The one who spoke was an instructor from Temple Seminary. With his status and position, he naturally couldn't stand at the bow of the ship, but from a distance of a mile or so, he could barely make out Chen Chongqing's sword move within the misty rain. He felt that Chen Chongqing's sword maneuver was very familiar, causing him to be very surprised and subconsciously blurted it out. Many people heard these words, and then thought back to Chen Chongqing's sword move, discovering that it was actually the Temple Seminary's extremely unknown plum hut sword. For a moment, no one could say anything. The fact that Chen Chongqing had dabbled in the path of the sword had long since caused everyone to be shocked to the point of numbness, but how could he think of, and dare to use such an extremely common sword move to counter Su Yurong's sword of great light? And he had actually succeeded? Had he really succeeded? No, this was just the beginning. The sword of great light, one of the world's 5 ultimate techniques, how could it be so easily broken? Just as Chen Chongqing's sword technique broke through the mist and rain and revealed its edge, the light that had been faintly restrained within the mist and snow suddenly flared up once again, transforming into countless sword slashes, carrying snow and rain as they once again slashed towards Chen Chongqing. The light was still in the snow, Su Yurong was still on the other side of the bridge, but there were already countless sword moves coming. Those sword moves were all hidden, and just from the traces in the smoke, one could feel how exquisite these sword moves were, and how powerful they were. This was the most inconceivable aspect of the sword of great light. Light traveled between heaven and earth, it could mimic all things, it could mimic 10,000 sword. Even if Chen Chongqing's cultivation in the path of the sword was higher, what could he do against such a sword technique that could change on its own? Su Yurong's sword didn't pause in the slightest. At the same time that the Temple Seminary instructor let out a cry of surprise, the temple sword broke through the snow and was only a dozen or so zhang away from Chen Chongqing. The sword force of a great light had already crossed the stone bridge and arrived before him. Different from the previous battles in front of the Tradition Academy, Chen Chongqing didn't use discerning step to try and escape from the opponent's sword technique or attack. This was because after fighting with Nank, he knew clearly that trying to compete with the bloodline of the Heavenly Phoenix in speed was an extremely stupid choice. And since he had drawn a path on the snow bridge and Su Yurong had taken it, how could he retreat now? His eyes were calm and focused. Looking at the sky full of light in the mist and snow, he didn't hesitate. Holding the sword with both hands, he swung from top to bottom towards the place where the light was the brightest. Tang 36 cheers came from the great ship, staff of mountain toppling, break. Su Yurong's temple sword had yet to truly fall, but what broke through the mist and snow was sword intent. Similarly, Chen Chongqing's transformation of the Orthodox Academy's staff of mountain toppling into a sword was unable to truly break through the sword of great light. The light in the mist and snow had already transformed into 3 sword intents, and Chen Chongqing had responded with 3 attacks. All of this happened in an extremely brief period of time. The sword glows illuminated the bridge of helplessness shrouded in mist and rain, and then they did not fade away, one after the other. The Luo River seemed to have entered a thunderstorm in midsummer, with lightning occasionally flashing. Yet the clouds formed from the mist and snow were still as berserk and powerful as ever. They were not torn apart by the lightning and continued to move towards the other end of the bridge. Whether it was the people on the ship or the people on the 2 shores of the Luo River, none of them could clearly make out the details on the bridge of helplessness, such as those fluttering sleeves and white muslin. They could only faintly make out the figures of Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong in the mist and mist. The divine qi exuded by the slowly advancing Su Yurong grew thicker and thicker, the pressure of the light growing stronger and stronger, just like a statue of a god in the Li Palace. As for Chen Chongqing, he was still standing at his original position, calm and silent like a stone. No matter how much water washed him, his form would not change, his heart would not waver. One was in motion, one was in stillness. What was still was the heart, what was in motion was the sword. The stainless sword was like a bolt of lightning, while the temple sword was like a bright sun. But in the mist and mist, they were actually more like two ships sailing on the great sea at dusk, sailing against the wind and breaking through the wave. They gradually grew closer and closer, and at the very last moment, they would meet. Even now, Chern Chongqing and Su Yorong's swords had yet to meet, but their sword intents had already met countless times. The Luo River emitted countless clear cries of swords, closely followed by the swishing of swords cutting through all hard objects. Protected by a powerful array, the bridge of helplessness that even warships could not destroy seemed so frail in the sea of light and the massive waves raised by the two swords. Countless cracks appeared on the hard surface of the bridge, and the bits of stone that flew out were instantly pulverized by the sword energy. The railings on the two sides were covered in dense cracks like spiderwebs. Those beast heads that had been quietly watching the Luo River for countless years were cut into bits by the splashing sword intents, their ears and faces severed. The people on the two shores of the Luo River were somewhat far away, so they could not clearly see what was happening on the bridge. They could only see the light in the falling snow and hear those sounds. Even so, their minds were still agitated and uneasy. The people on the ship were a little closer, and they cried out in shock at the exquisite sword techniques in the mist and mist. "Is that the heaven-quaking sword style?" 3 sings of the fisherman's song. How could he know the sword style of the emotion-severing sect? Cries of surprise came from below. The people standing at the bow of the ship silently gazed at the bridge of helplessness. Yes, there truly was no sword style in this world that could completely break the sword of great light, because this sword technique of Holy Maiden Peak was too inconceivable. In the instant the light appeared in the mist, Chern Chongqing recalled the records in the Taoist canon and felt the same emotion. He had never seen such a complicated and all-encompassing sword style, yet so simple that it already coincided with the heavenly Tao. He had never even imagined that the sword of great light was already the final shore of the path of the sword. Ever since he began cultivating the Tao, the only time he had felt something similar was when he saw Su Li cleave open a path to the south with that heaven-shrouding sword. With his current cultivation in the path of the sword, if he wanted to break the sword of great light, there were only 2 methods. One was to use the final move of the Mountly sword style, or the other was to use the 10,000 swords from the sword pool, like he had done in the Garden of Zhou or when he faced Zhu Luo in Xuanyang City. However, the former would inevitably lead to life and death together, so he could not choose. The latter was something that not even he could control. It would surpass the calculations he had made in the past 7 days, so he could not choose. In the end, he used the third sword that Su Li had taught him, and also the sword that Su Li himself had not learned. It was just that this time, he used sword intent, not the sword itself. He did not use the sword to defend, only the clumsiness of the sword, because no matter how one looked at it, that method was very stupid. He used countless swords to break Su Yorong's one sword. The light illuminated the secular world, able to imitate all the sword intents in the heavenly realm and the mortal realm. Then he would use all the swords in the heavenly realm and the mortal realm. This method was very stupid, but to be able to learn all the swords in the heavenly realm and the mortal realm, and to know when and which sword to use, to break the formless form and unintentional intent before the light, how could someone truly be stupid? The teachers and students of the Ivy Academies at the bottom of the ship could not understand, but the important figures standing at the bow of the ship were well aware of this point. So when they saw those sword intents crisscrossing the world on the snowy bridge, they fell silent for a very long time. The Minister of Rites was not a cultivator, so he could not help but ask, "How many swords?" Ling Hai Jiwang expressionlessly replied, "Principal Chen used 43 swords." Taoist Siyuan said with a complex expression, "Not even one sword is finished." These two prefects of the orthodoxy were both correct, and they were not talking about Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong. Su Yorong's sword of great light truly had not been finished. Chen Chongqing's 43 swords could naturally be understood as one sword. The bow of the ship was quiet. In truth, at the very start there had been people talking the entire time. When Chen Chongqing used the sixth sword, Su Moyu softly said, "I've lost." When Chen Chongqing used the ninth sword, a divine general who had returned from Temple Pass to report to the imperial court creased his brow and shook his head. When Chen Chongqing used the 11th sword, Shui He's hand lightly caressed his severed arm. When Chen Chongqing used the 27th sword, Zhixiu shook his head. If he and Chen Chongqing had a direct confrontation, he would have lost. Of course, this was just a discussion of the sword, not a battle to the death. Then he glanced at Tang 36, somewhat confused, thinking, could it be that you can last longer than me? Tang 36 had never said when he would lose, but now he sighed. Have we all learned the sword for nothing? Many people at the bow of the ship had rather unsightly expressions, but they could not refute this. Everyone knew that Chen Chongqing was well versed in the Taoist canon, so could it be that he had also learned all the sword styles in the world? Days of being as busy as a dog without a stockpile of manuscripts are just that sorrowful. I very much miss the state of my work from last month. I want to strive to start working hard next Tuesday. Chapter 521. Zhixiu gazed at the mist and snow on the bridge, the light in the snow, and said, "It truly is so." And no one refuted his words. If Chen Chongqing's cultivation in the path of the sword was enough to make everyone sigh with emotion, then Su Yorong's level of cultivation left them speechless. Just like Tang 36 had said to Chen Chongqing in the Plum Garden Inn, she had always left others speechless. From the start of the battle until now, Su Yorong had always calmly controlled the situation on the bridge of helplessness. Chen Chongqing's sword seemed powerful, but in the end, he was only passively breaking through. If Chen Chongqing was already inconceivably powerful, then just how powerful was Su Yorong, who was still as calm as ever? Sword intent assailed the stone bridge, sword energy crushed the array, snow and rain flew together, light and flowing water confronted each other. The crowd on the two shores of the Luo River could only see the beautiful scene of rain and snow and the faintly discernible and mythical battle. They could not understand the meaning behind it and constantly cheered and cried out in alarm, but the people on the great ship grew quieter and quieter, especially the important figures at the bow of the ship, because they saw perfection. The stone bridge was between heaven and earth, the light traversed between heaven and earth, and all the sword styles between heaven and earth seemed to appear on the stone bridge. Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong could not be considered top-class experts in the current world. Even on the great ship, there were at least 10 people who could easily defeat them. However, the comprehension ability and cultivation in the path of the sword they had displayed in this battle could be said to be almost perfect. This also meant that they possessed unimaginable potential. As long as no major accidents occurred, they would inevitably surpass each and every one of the people at the bow of the ship. The youngest holy maiden of the South and the future pope were truly extraordinary. At some point, Shui He had already walked to the very front of the bow of the ship. As he gazed at the battle on the bridge, his emotions grew more and more complex. The hand that had been stroking his severed arm had long since fallen, gripping the non-existent hilt of his blade in the snowy air, as if he wanted to participate in this battle. Suddenly, his expression somewhat changed, because he could faintly sense a very familiar aura in those extremely complex sword slashes in the snow and rain. It was not the aura of a sword, but the aura of a blade. What was going on? Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong were clearly using swords, so why did blade intent break through the bridge? That saber intent was still so dense and dangerous. Shui He suddenly remembered that Chen Chongqing was using Wang Po's way of the saber. He thought he understood the reasoning behind it and stopped thinking about it. He continued to immerse himself in the battle, trying to gain more comprehension. Chen Chongsheng, who was standing on the bridge, didn't feel any blade spirit. Firstly, the battle was too tense, making it hard for him to be distracted. Secondly, he was a person involved in the battle. More importantly, the blade spirit that Shui, he felt, didn't originate from his and Su Yurong's swords, but when his and Su Yurong's sword spirits merged together, the aftertaste that splashed out. If he could discover this detail, he might be able to understand something. Somewhat regretfully, he couldn't discover it. His gaze and mind were completely focused on the 10,000 rays of light in the snow. His spiritual sense was rapidly circulating, incessantly calculating and deducing. The intellectual sword was constantly slashing out, blocking that terrifying sword of great light behind that line. He did not know how many times he had used the sword, only that he had not been able to learn all the sword styles of the heavenly world, so it was very difficult for him to endure. Back in Xuanyang City, he could only use the blazing sword a few times, but today, he had already used it several dozen times. The true essence provided by the blazing snowy plains had long since been exhausted, and he was now completely relying on the lake outside his ethereal palace to support him. But he was not worried, because reality had proven that his 7 days of preparation had been useful. Su Yorong had unexpectedly learned the Sword of Great Light. That divine and dignified sword technique, like the ocean and also like a dewdrop, had still not been able to break through that line in the middle of the bridge of helplessness. Moreover, he was confident that Su Yorong would not be able to hold on for too long. When Su Yorong's true essence could no longer support the Sword of Great Light, that would be his chance to counterattack. However, for some reason, there was a faint feeling in the depths of his heart that he didn't want it to end here. Because right now, he was very happy. Although the intellectual sword was constantly squeezing away at his spiritual sense, the blazing sword was constantly consuming his true essence, and the stupid sword was constantly grinding away at his mind, he was still very happy. This was like playing chess and suddenly encountering an opponent of similar skill and excellent chess skills. Or like drinking wine and suddenly encountering a companion who had a similar capacity for liquor and could form a poem with a cup of wine. Or like debating the Tao and encountering a deskmate who was amiable in speech and absolutely detestable in appearance. As he gazed at the girl's bright figure in the snow, Chen Chongqing had this sort of feeling. He even felt like he had returned to the garden of Zhou and was talking to that girl in the snowy temple in the plains. Incisively and vividly, to his heart's content, happy, and calm. He even felt that Su Yorong in the snow was probably thinking the same thing as him. Yes, Su Yorong was also thinking the same thing. Of course, she was thinking even more clearly than he was. Su Yorong had not thought of any chess companion or drinking buddy. She immediately thought of that night in the snowy temple. For the sake of this battle on the Bridge of Helplessness, the two of them had prepared for 7 whole days. More than 300 sheets of paper brimming with calculations and deductions, 17 star charts, were in the snow and rain, in the marks of sword intent. They used this to play chess, to talk, to fight. If this could continue forever, it would naturally be very good, but in reality, this was not possible. The falling snow shattered, the falling rain melted, the surface of the stone bridge shattered into a spider web, the Luo River beneath the bridge covered in tens of thousands of scales. Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong had both reached the end of their paths. The girl's figure had already appeared in the snow, extremely close to the line in the middle of the bridge, but her footsteps had become much heavier. The transformations of Chen Chongqing's sword style had also begun to gradually become sluggish. It was no longer as nimble as it had been at the beginning, even seeming somewhat unfathomable. The snow suddenly fell, the rain suddenly dispersed, and the bridge of helplessness inexplicably became clear and bright. 2 figures met on the bridge. Like the remnants of a game of chess, with only 2 moves left, victory and defeat determined. Like the remnants of a banquet, with a few yellow flowers falling between the dishes and bowls, competitive and austere. In the wind and snow, the people were gone, the temple was empty, only the ashes in front of the statue of God still retained some warmth. The white gauze fluttered, Su Yorong's eyes were filled with divine light, like the stars on the astrolabe. Chen Chongqing held his sword and lightly flicked, the edge of the sword piercing through the falling snow, like 300 sheets of paper dancing in the little building of the Orthodox Academy. Su Yorong floated up like a god descending to the world. Her sword, imbued with light, stabbed towards Chen Chongqing. Intellectual sword, strike. Temple sword, break. Just at this moment, something that no one could have imagined happened. Chen Chongqing's 2 hands were originally gripping the hilt of his sword, but now he suddenly loosened his left hand, stretching out through the air towards the temple sword that had broken through the snowy sky. What did he want to do? Even if his body had been bathed in dragon blood, comparable to the most perfect purification, it was still a body of flesh and blood. How could it resist the edge of the temple sword? Not to mention that the temple sword was imbued with Su Yorong's heavenly phoenix true essence, bringing with it an infinite light. Even a great expert like Mao Qiu would probably not dare to use a single hand to receive it. Chen Chongqing's movements were very casual, very natural, like he was extending his hand towards a bookshelf to take a book. Of course, he did not want to use his left hand to block the temple sword. He only wanted to form a connection with the temple sword. His finger, besides the snowy sky and the light of the temple sword, also contained a faintly discernible connection. The temple sword had originally been brought out of the garden of Zhou by him. He was extremely familiar with the sword intent of the temple sword, so how could the temple sword not recognize his qi? When the sword pool appeared in the garden of Zhou, 10,000 old swords had followed him into battle, including the temple sword. All of these swords were his companions, his comrades. On the battlefield, how could a comrade attack you? In a moment of life and death, how could a comrade not hear your cry for help? An unimaginable ripple of qi appeared on the bridge of helplessness. The temple sword fiercely trembled in the snowy sky, then quickly flew towards Chen Chongqing. It was flying, not stabbing, because there was no longer any hostility, much less killing intent. The sword of great light suddenly dispersed. However, an even more shocking matter occurred. Su Yorong seemed to have long since calculated this scene. Her right hand still gripped the temple sword. Borrowing the momentum, her white dress danced in the snowy sky. Her figure transformed into blood, gathering away the 10,000 rays of light, and directly arrived in front of Chen Chongqing. If Chen Chongqing had not used his spiritual sense to shake the temple sword at the last moment, no matter how fast Su Yorong's movement technique was, it would have been impossible for her to break through his stainless sword so quickly. Chen Chongqing had calculated 7 days. She had also calculated that he had 7 days. There was a light squelch. Perhaps it was because his control over the temple sword had come a little too late, or perhaps it was because Su Yorong was still the holy maiden, and although she had only been reunited with the temple sword for 7 days, her control over the sword was even stronger than Chen Chongqing had imagined. Or perhaps it was because something had happened that neither of them could understand. The temple sword stabbed into Chen Chongqing's left shoulder, causing blood to spurt out. Then, the temple sword fell into his hand. The wind and snow began to gently dance once more, whistling as if even the heavens and earth were somewhat astonished. For some reason, Chen Chongqing's movements were somewhat sluggish. The stainless sword in his right hand, which had originally been at the pinnacle of perfection, had deviated slightly. With a leisurely gust of wind, Su Yorong extended her slender index finger. It seemed slow, but it was actually incomparably swift, pointing at the space between Chen Chongqing's eyebrows. If it had been a normal finger, it would have been utterly incapable of threatening Chen Chongqing's life. Although his body, which had been bathed in dragon blood, could not directly resist the famed swords on the tier of legendary weapons, it should not have allowed a slender finger to break through his defense. Yet for some reason, an immense sense of danger suddenly welled up in his heart, and he even felt that his life was about to be lost. A speck of light blossomed on the tip of Su Yorong's finger, like the light of a firefly, yet it seemed to contain boundless energy. No one could be faster than this finger of hers. At the very least, in all the battles that had taken place, besides Nank, no one else could match the speed of this finger of hers. From the start of the battle until now, she had never unfurled the wings of the phoenix, because she did not need to. The body did not have the wings of the rainbow phoenix, but their hearts were linked by telepathy. This was the rhino spirit finger. The next chapter will determine victory and defeat. The next chapter will be released at night, around 8:20. Chapter 522. Cries of alarm rose up from the great ship far away on the Luo River. They watched as Chen Chongqing extended his left hand and used a method they could not understand to easily break the Sword of Great Light. Then, they watched as Su Yorong seemed to have guessed his method ahead of time, borrowing his method to break the sword to break his sword energy. Then, they watched as Chen Chongqing clearly controlled the temple sword, but the temple sword still pierced into his body. Finally, they saw Su Yorong extend that seemingly casual finger towards Chen Chongqing, but in reality, it carried the weight of a thunderbolt. Rhino Spirit Finger. Daoist Siyuan was moved. Was Chen Chongqing going to lose? Would he die to this finger? Mao Qiu-yu's expression changed dramatically. His sleeves rippled as he prepared to rush up the bridge. Tang 36's complexion became abnormally unsightly, as did Mou, Prince Chun Lu, and the others. To decide victory and defeat, they actually had to decide life and death? Everything had happened too quickly. No one could have imagined that Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong could, in such a short amount of time, go from extreme movement to extreme stillness, and then back to extreme movement. This meant that they had already entered their own tempo, and what was even more frightening was that their tempo was very similar. This meant that it would be very difficult for anyone to break their tempo, not even those powerful figures who were far stronger than them. Silence reigned. The light on the bridge of helplessness gradually drifted away, like time. The falling snow was still sparse, unable to hide their figures, nor was it able to fill the line in the middle of the bridge. On one side of the line was still snow, on the other side was still rain. Su Yorong had already crossed the line and was standing in front of Chen Chongqing. The forefinger of her right hand was pressed against the space between his eyebrows, but it was not completely pressed. There was still the distance of a dagger between her finger and the space between his eyebrows. Because that dagger was in the middle. At some point, Chen Chongqing had raised the stainless sword and blocked Su Yorong's finger. The body was not that of a rainbow phoenix, but their hearts were connected, let alone the body of a rainbow phoenix? Su Yorong's rhino spirit finger was as fast as lightning, but it was not as fast as his sword. This could only mean that he had long ago predicted that she would use the rhino spirit finger. The temple sword had left a clear wound on his left shoulder. The edge of the wound was even mixed with bits of starry matter, but the hilt was already in his hand. Su Yorong slowly retracted her finger. A drop of golden-red blood slowly flowed out from between her fingers and then dripped onto the bridge. The rain and snow suddenly evaporated, forming a faint mist. The stainless sword had blocked the rhino horn finger, but it had not been able to completely neutralize the power of that slender finger. A drop of blood also flowed from the center of Chen Chongqing's brow, as if a red mole had appeared. The stone bridge was silent. The people on the distant Luo River ships realized that the battle was not as desperate as they had imagined, so they temporarily calmed down. Separated by the thin mist, Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong looked at each other and didn't speak for a long time. Both of them were injured. It seemed that Chen Chongqing's injuries were more severe, but both swords were currently in his hands. So who won in the end? It was obvious that Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong no longer cared about the final outcome. Looking at each other, their hearts were filled with countless questions. Why is it that when I seized control of the temple sword through the air and had it deviate 7 inches to the right at the last moment, the temple sword still stabbed into my left shoulder? Could it be that from the very beginning, your sword of great light never had any intention of stabbing my vitals, only wanting to stab into my left shoulder in the end? Why is it that your final stainless sword, which can be said to be incomparably intelligent and had a great chance of falling together with my rhino horn finger, and even if it didn't work out, would still be able to fight to the death together? Why did it just have to pause at that moment, and in the end mysteriously and indescribably appear in front of your brow and block my finger? 7 days, 17 star maps, 300 sheets of paper, countless calculations, all the experience and wisdom of the two of them in their lives of cultivation had been placed in this battle. They had already calculated every detail to the extreme, yet in the end, they still realized that what awaited them was still an accident. This was because they could calculate the path of the sword, could calculate the weather and geography, but they could not calculate the human heart, could not calculate what the other was thinking. Chen Chongqing had calculated for 7 days and 7 nights, but he had not calculated that Su Yurong was actually able to calculate that he would use his sword intent to shake the temple sword, thereby shattering her sword of great light, and then borrow its momentum to advance. Most crucially, he had not calculated that Su Yurong had been holding back from the start to the end, that she did not have a shred of killing intent towards him, that she did not even have a strong desire to injure him. Thus, he had calculated the distance at which he would shake the temple sword wrong. The temple sword had stabbed into his left shoulder, but in reality, he had injured himself. In this battle on the Bridge of Helplessness, Chen Chongqing only wanted a draw, but he did not know that she only did not want to lose. Similarly, Su Yurong had not expected that he would think this way, because she knew who he was, but he did not know who she was, so he had no reason to protect her. She believed that he wanted to win, so in the end, he would definitely use the temple sword to break her sword of great light. In front of the mausoleum of Zhou, she had seen a similar scene and knew that he had this ability. She had already made her preparations. When he tried to steal the temple sword, she would use the momentum to take control of the entire situation, and in the end, announce in front of the countless people on the 2 shores of the Luo River that this battle was a draw. However, she had not expected that Chen Chongqing had no intention of stealing the temple sword and counterattacking, only defending. Even the final movement of the stainless sword was the same. In short, they had thought of one place, but they had not thought of another. After countless deductions and calculations had met, they had become unexpected. Su Yurong had not thought of even more, because she had confirmed that he did not know that she was that Lady Chujian, so she had made even more mistakes. Her mistake was that she still did not completely understand this youth called Chen Chongqing. He seemed to be even better than the person she had met in the garden of Zhou, even better than the person she had imagined. This was very good. She had lost very willingly. I've lost. If life and death had to be decided, this battle could naturally continue. Her injuries were lighter than Chen Chongqing's, and she still had many techniques that she had not used. However, this was not a battle to the death, but a competition of swords. Now that both swords were in Chen Chongqing's hands, she believed that she had lost. Without any concession, she very calmly accepted this fact. Chen Chongqing could not remain calm, because there were still many things that he did not understand. And when he heard Su Yurong's voice, he found it even more impossible to remain calm. This voice was very pleasing to the ear, like the water in a clear stream, the dew on an autumn maple. This voice was rather familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere before. He turned to Su Yurong, but his gaze was still blocked by the white gauze. But he still stared at the white gauze, staring more and more seriously, and more nervous. Even if the wind and snow rose again, the remaining sword intents would hiss and hiss, but they would not be able to sever his gaze. His body suddenly became somewhat stiff, and his voice also became somewhat tense. Can you say that again? The Heavens Choosing cartoon has released a trailer. In a little while, I will post it on WeChat. I will have to trouble everyone to move forward and directly watch it, or perhaps reply with the words cartoon trailer to take a look. Chapter 523. This was the first time the two had spoken since the battle on the Bridge of Helplessness had begun. It was also the first time Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong had spoken. Su Yurong said, "I lost." Chen Chongqing said, "Say it again." If the one who said these words was Tang 36, then these words would undoubtedly be an extremely damaging taunt. Su Yurong would definitely use the true blood of the heavenly phoenix to burn this bridge. But she knew Chen Chongqing's personality and knew that he had guessed something. She was a little nervous, so she did not get angry. She silently smiled. The white veil covered her face, making it impossible to see her smile. One could only faintly sense the meaning flowing through the air. At this moment, the wind and snow stirred up. The white veil hanging from the edge of Su Yurong's veil hat was lifted up. In this battle, sword intents crisscrossed. The sword of great light in particular was extremely terrifying. Her dress and hat were protected by true essence, but the white veil could not escape. The fluttering white veil tore apart and slowly fell to the ground. The white veil's misfortune was Chen Chongqing's fortune, because he finally saw her face. It was a face of indescribable beauty. Her eyebrows and eyes were picturesque. Her skin was delicate and somewhat whiter than snow. She was truly very beautiful, beautiful enough to steal the morale of the three armies and light the world. But this face was unfamiliar to Chen Chongqing. Just when he felt regret assailing him, he saw her eyes. It was a pair of extremely beautiful phoenix eyes. Countless stars seemed to burn in the eyes, bright and dazzling. But he opened his eyes wide and stared into her eyes, looking into their depths. There were no stars, no light, no holiness, no responsibility. There was only an empty mountain after a new rain. At this time, this pair of moving eyes still had many words to say, many smiles. Chen Chongqing naturally recognized this pair of eyes. He would never be able to forget this pair of eyes. He had once believed that he would never be able to look into these eyes again, until this moment, until the moment of silence after the battle in the rain and snow at the Bridge of Helplessness, when the wind blew off the white veil covering his opponent's face. Previously, sitting in the mausoleum of Zhou, he had truly experienced what was called a tide of sorrow. At this moment, he finally understood that the description in the books of being struck by lightning was not an exaggeration, but a real situation. In the somewhat dim snowy sky, an invisible bolt of lightning seemed to appear and directly struck him. His body was extremely stiff, and he was speechless. His hands that were holding the sword hilt were cold, but his body was burning hot. With great difficulty, he pulled his gaze away from her eyes and clumsily turned around, gazing at the vast expanse of whiteness upstream of the Luo River and its waters. After a while, he turned around once more and looked at her. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, nothing came out. He could only gaze once more at the uninhabited upper reaches of the Luo River, because he was worried that if he continued to look at her, his already slightly trembling legs would go soft. Looking at his clumsy and comical appearance, the smile in Su Yurong's eyes deepened. She covered her mouth and laughed, and a flower bloomed in her eyes. She walked to the edge of the bridge and stood at his side. Gazing upstream of the Luo River, she calmly asked, "Is there anything to see? Don't talk to me first. I'm a little confused right now." Chen Chongqing's face was somewhat red. It wasn't because of the lingering power of the rhino spirit finger, nor was it because of the freezing weather, but because he was nervous. He looked at the Luo River, smelled the faint fragrance coming from his side, and felt flustered. He didn't even dare to glance to the side. Before the battle, he had also been very nervous, so when he watched the snow fall into the Luo River from the edge of the bridge, he finally found peace in his heart. However, no matter how much he watched the snow fall into the Luo River, he found it impossible to calm down. Su Yorong lightly pushed a strand of her hair behind her ear and gazed at the side of his face. Not wanting to make him feel too distressed, she restrained her smile and calmly asked, "In that last attack, why didn't you follow the original ginseng position and instead suddenly bring your sword up to your eyebrows?" When it came to the topic of the sword, Chen Chongqing was indeed somewhat calmer. He muttered, "I guessed." When Su Li passed on the intellectual sword to him, he had said very clearly that many times, one had to guess. This explanation sounded rather unreasonable, but with Su Yorong's talent, she naturally understood. She originally didn't want to tease him, but when she heard these words, she couldn't help but say, "Then why can't you guess who I am?" She spoke very calmly, but if one listened carefully, there was a faint undertone to her words. Chen Chongqing was now stupefied. He lowered his head, unable to speak. Su Yorong said nothing more. She quietly stood at his side, watching the snow fall into the Luo River. From the start of the battle until now, the two shores of the Luo River had been filled with cheers and discussions that soared to the heavens. When the snow and rain met, when the temple sword and the stainless sword blossomed with their brightest colors, the cheers and discussions reached their peak. The ordinary people could not understand this battle, but the dazzling sight on the Bridge of Helplessness was enough to move them. This battle that had attracted the attention of tens of thousands of people had finally come to an end, but the praises and discussions still continued, because the people could not see just who had obtained the final victory. "I think it should be little Principal Chun. Didn't the Holy Maiden retreat first in the end?" Both of them were injured, and little Principal Chen's injuries were even more severe. "What basis do you have to say that the Holy Maiden lost? But didn't you see that the last two swords were both in little Principal Chen's hands? And what does that mean? The Holy Maiden still hasn't used her truly powerful technique. Did you see the legendary Phoenix blood? Are you really sure that little Principal Chen used his full strength?" News quickly came from the front of the riverbank that Su Yorong had admitted defeat to Chen Chongqing's sword. After a period of silence, the two shores of the Luo River finally began to gradually digest this fact. "Hey, look at the bridge." Countless gazes turned to the distant Bridge of Helplessness and saw Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong standing shoulder to shoulder, seemingly softly discussing something. After a while, they no longer spoke. They quietly stood there, allowing the snow to fall. Because they were separated by some distance, it seemed like their bodies were leaning against each other. The discussions on the two shores of the Luo River gradually died down, becoming abnormally quiet. The crowd was rather flabbergasted at this sight on the Bridge of Helplessness. Just a moment ago, they had been wielding swords and fighting, but now they could stand shoulder to shoulder and enjoy the scenery? What was going on here? The Holy Maiden, has her sword been lenient? Only an extremely small minority of the crowd watching the battle on the shore supported Chen Chongqing, but even these people fell silent. They could see that this battle was incomparably marvelous, but it was clear that neither side was fighting to the death. The crowd could not understand the marvelous sword techniques in the rain and snow, but when they saw the scene on the bridge, they could faintly sense a certain meaning flowing within. The scene on the Bridge of Helplessness was very beautiful. In the scene, they stood together in harmony, in tranquility. The crowd could not bear to make a sound to break it. Only after a very, very long time did the crowd on the two shores of the Luo River gradually begin to sigh with many similar sentiments. Such a pair of immortal companions, why must they draw their swords against each other? There was another chapter tonight. Chapter 524. In contrast to the people on the banks of the Luo River, the people on the ship were even more confused. The battle had already ended for some time, but Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong still hadn't walked off the Bridge of Helplessness. Instead, they quietly stood on the other side of the bridge, looking at something unknown. Whether it was important figures like Mao Qiyu, Linghai Jiwang, or even Su Shiji, they all believed that Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong did not know each other. Moreover, they were well aware of the meaning hidden behind this battle on the Bridge of Helplessness, so they did not believe that Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong would develop some sort of mutual appreciation through this exchange of swords. Then why were they able to stand together so calmly after the battle had just ended? And they were so close to each other? What are they doing now? What are they doing? Tang 36 asked as he looked at the backs of the two people on the snow bridge. Mou was the same. When she thought back to that night when Su Yorong went to the Orthodox Academy, she felt that there was something wrong with this matter, and slightly creased her brow. Tang 36 said angrily, "Whether you're pretending to be lonely or pretending to be desperate, can't you take care of the feelings of us audience members?" Su Mou asked from the side, "What kind of mood?" Tang 36 pointed at Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong, who were on the Bridge of Helplessness, and said, "You just fought such an intense fight and you're both injured. Now that you're being stared at by so many people, you still have the mood to admire the snow? Don't you think this is too what?" That was a dirty word. The people on the two shores of the Luo River and on the ship all had different moods, but none of them wanted to curse like him. Because at this moment the scene on the Bridge of Helplessness was truly beautiful. Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong stood on the other side of the bridge, their backs to the great ship on the Luo River and the tens of thousands of people on the two shores. It was as if they were not in this world. After an unknown amount of time, Chen Chongqing raised his head, looked at her and said, "You." Su Yorong did not look at him. She gazed upstream of the Luo River and calmly said, "Do not speak." Chen Chongqing was a little hesitant and said, "Then I." Su Yorong slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "Didn't I say not to speak?" Chen Chongqing lowered his head and said, "Oh." Su Yorong looked at the falling snowflakes in front of her and said, "Don't tell anyone about us." "Didn't I tell you not to talk?" Chen Chongqing only dared to think about it in his heart. Then he thought about her request and felt a little confused. Su Yorong suddenly asked, "Are you happy?" Chen Chongqing answered honestly, "Yes." Su Yorong turned her head to look at him and said with a smile, "So silly." Chen Chongqing scratched his head and said, "Ah. I'll be leaving first," Su Yorong said. Chen Chongqing was a little surprised and said anxiously, "Ah?" Su Yorong took the temple sword and walked towards the other end of the bridge. Chen Chongqing looked at her back that was gradually disappearing into the wind and snow. He didn't know how to react. He once more felt that sensation he had felt a few days ago in the mausoleum of Zhou. Countless emotions washed over him like a tidal wave. This time there was no sadness in the tide. It was extremely complicated. He stood on the Bridge of Helplessness in a daze, watching the white crane fly away. Suddenly, he looked at the young bird that looked like a chicken. In the wind and snow, the young ping turned its head and glanced at him, seeming extremely mocking. He turned his head to look at the Luo River once more, leaning against the railing with his head lowered. He didn't cover his face with his hands. He knew that his face was burning hot. He also didn't cover his face with his hands because there was a small slip of paper in his hands. This small slip of paper had been secretly stuffed into his hands by Su Yorong when she received the temple sword. In the 6 ivies, in the private schools of the provinces, counties and countryside, when the spring sun was shining brightly outside the window, there would always be small slips of paper constantly flowing between the desks. Those small slips of paper were like the light of spring. Today, in the midst of the wind and snow, in front of the tens of thousands of people of the capital, he had also received a small slip of paper. On the slip of paper was an address and a time. Fortune Peace Roads Fish with Tofu. Today after dusk. This was the first time Chen Chongqing had received this sort of small slip of paper. He thought back to those novels about gifted scholars and beautiful women that he had read and Tang 36's daily teachings. He thought somewhat uncertainly, is this the meaning of a date? The wind and snow continued as before, and the bridge of helplessness gradually began to liven up. Su Yorong conceded and then left. This battle that had been the focus of everyone's attention finally came to an end. Putting aside what sort of variables this battle on the Bridge of Helplessness would bring to the conflict between the Li Palace and the Imperial Court, this battle would assuredly be recorded in the annals of history as the first battle between the Pope and the Holy Maiden. It would then be mentioned countless times. For example, right now, many people wanted to know the details of this battle, especially Tang 36. He paid no attention to the signals of the Orthodoxy cavalry and the Imperial Guard. He transformed into a wisp of smoke and ran to the Bridge of Helplessness. Panting for breath, he asked Chen Chongqing, "Just who won?" Chen Chongqing's mental state was still somewhat absent-minded. Upon hearing his question, he subconsciously replied, "She didn't lose. I warned you before, don't go easy on her just because she's pretty. But look at it now. You didn't go easy on her, but you're playing this game with your mouth. She didn't lose, so you lost?" Tang 36 angrily said, "Su Yorong has already admitted that she lost, and you still want to trick me." Chen Chongqing didn't understand why he was so angry. He thought, even if it's like this, shouldn't you be happy as my friend? Since you could defeat her, why did you want me to bet on you losing before the battle? Just what do you mean? As Tang 36 thought of this matter, he became even more angry and said, "You're a pig." Only now did Chen Chongqing think of this matter, and then he thought of many other things. Somewhat ashamed, he said, "Yes, I'm a pig." Tang 36 stared blankly. Only now did he realize that there was something wrong with Chen Chongqing. He seemed to be in a daze. Under the gazes of countless citizens of the capital, and the cheers on both sides of the street, Chen Chongqing and the others returned to the Orthodox Academy. The restaurant outside the academy's walls was hung with colorful lanterns, and the sound of zither could be heard. The teachers and students who were proud and joyful because of the principal's victory were celebrating to their heart's content. After Chen Chongqing returned to his room, he didn't come out for a very long time. Tang 36, Su Mou, and Xian Yuanpa stood downstairs, looking at the window of the third floor, their faces full of suspicion. Chen Chongqing had finally obtained victory in this battle that had attracted the attention of the world, and it had been a beautiful victory. There was nothing that could be criticized, but why was it that his face didn't have much of the emotion that a victor should have? Even if he had an engagement with Su Yorong, perhaps his emotions would be a bit complicated, but why was it that it had to be like this? Just what had happened on the Bridge of Helplessness? What problem had Chen Chongqing encountered? To make a person with mysophobia admit that he's a pig, Tang 36 looked at the window, his expression grave, and said, "This matter seems to be very complicated." Chapter 525. At this moment, Zheshio walked out of the building with the help of his walking stick. He looked at the three of them and said, "If you want to know, just ask him directly." Tang 36 shook his head and said, "I asked him, but he didn't tell me. Moreover, judging from his reaction at that time, I'm afraid he wouldn't tell me even if you beat him to death." Xian Yuanpa felt a bit of a headache and said, "In your opinion, what is most likely to have happened?" Tang 36 said, "I suspect that he prepared for Su Yorong to win from the beginning, so he told me to bet on him to lose. In the end, he didn't expect that he would win when he wasn't careful, so he's acting so strange now." Su Moyu shook his head and said, "Even if there was a deviation from our calculations, it shouldn't be like this." Tang 36 said, "You don't understand. What I mean is, it is very likely that he used all his wealth to bet that he would lose." The field was silent. Xian Yuanpo only understood after a while. He sucked in a breath of cold air and said, "Then isn't Chen Chongqing faking it?" Zheshio saw that their words were getting more and more outrageous, so he shook his head and left, no longer caring about the matter. Su Mou helplessly said, "From what I see, Chen Chongqing's cultivation in the Tao has only deepened with each passing day, so victory or defeat isn't tied to his heart. You're all worrying too much. Xian Yuanpo thought for a moment before he shook his head and said, just now in the car, his silly smile and frown didn't seem like it. Tang 36 sneered and said, if even a black bear can see it, then he really has a problem. At this moment, a shout suddenly came from the window upstairs. He wasn't facing an enemy, nor was there a cockroach. He was just venting. Look, if he hadn't lost so much money, he wouldn't be in so much pain. When have you ever seen him so emotional? Tang 36 sighed as he looked at the window on the third floor. However, the next moment, the shouts from the room turned into the humming of a song. One could vaguely tell that it was an unknown folk song. Suemo Yu looked at Tang 36 and said, you still think he's in a bad mood? Tang 36 said, I've said it before, it's not a matter of good or bad mood, it's a matter of fluctuating emotions. Suemo Yu thought about it and realized that Tang 36's words made sense. In the Orthodox Academy, when it came to controlling one's emotions, Wofu Zhixio was naturally the strongest, followed by Chen Chongqing. No matter if it was in his daily life or during Xiu Xing or battle, Chen Chongqing had never lost control of his emotions. He was calm and steady beyond his age, even giving off a feeling of being experienced. But today, Chen Chongqing was clearly different. Have you heard of the story of a jean merchant who passed the imperial examinations? Tang 36 looked at the window on the third floor, squinted his eyes and said, if my conjecture just now was wrong, then it is extremely likely that he was too ecstatic after winning against Su Yurong, and thus became insane. At this moment, the window on the third floor was suddenly pushed open. Chen Chongqing stuck his head out and looked down. Tang 36 and the others were shocked. They quickly lowered their heads and mumbled something in a low voice. They pretended to be chatting so that he wouldn't notice anything strange. Chen Chongqing didn't know that people in the Tradition Academy were worried about his mental state. He yelled, Tang Tang, come up and help me. What kind of help? Help me take a look and see what clothes I should wear. Chen Chongqing pointed at the clean and tidy clothes in his wardrobe. Even after a year, they still looked like new clothes. He said to Tang 36, it's not a very formal occasion. I just don't want to be rude. Tang 36 looked at the 10-odd plain-colored clothes in the wardrobe and said helplessly, who do you think can tell the difference between these clothes? Just like how Su Yurong felt when she spied on the Orthodox Academy, Chen Chongqing's clothes were always of the same style, of the same plain colors. Besides being clean, there was nothing special about them. Chen Chongqing thought that this was indeed the case. After a while, he said, why don't you lend me one of your clothes? The moon of the demons really came to the capital? Tang 36 looked as if he heard something unbelievable. He stared at his eyes for a while and said in confusion, for normal people, the celebration banquet of the Li Palace is of course important. But you can't go in and out of the Li Palace so casually. Why do you care so much about it? Chen Chongqing was startled. Only now did he remember that there was a banquet at the Li Palace this evening. The battle on the Bridge of Helplessness attracted the attention of the world. As the principal of the Tradition Academy and the accepted successor of the Pope, he defeated Su Yurong, who represented the Tian High Divine Empress and the Southern sect. This celebration banquet was unavoidable. I have something to do in a while. You and Suemo you represent me to the Li Palace. I might need you to help me explain a few things to the Pope. Tang 36 was very surprised. He thought that there was nothing more important than this banquet. It was very likely that the Pope would announce something during this banquet. What are you going to do? I really can't tell you. Tang 36 didn't ask anymore. He walked to the window and looked at the snowy lake with his hands behind his back. He said casually, where does the Academy's carriage go to pick you up? They were too familiar with each other. Chen Chongqing knew what he wanted to do. He also knew that if he asked, Tang 36 would say that it was difficult to walk on the cold night. I won't tell you the location. Don't even think about following me. He looked at Tang 36's back and said, "This is my own business. Let me deal with it myself." Tang 36 didn't turn around. He asked, "Are you sure you can deal with it yourself?" Qin Chongqing said, "I'm not sure. I hope I can." After saying this, he took out a plain robe that he usually wore from his wardrobe. He looked at the bamboo dragonfly on the bookshelf and walked out of the room. Tang 36 stood by the window and watched him walk out of the house into the winter forest by the lake. After a while, he watched him leap over the wall of the academy and disappear. He couldn't help but frown. He thought, for you to be so cautious and your movements so secretive, just what are you going to do? He walked through the cold winter forest, crossed over the snow-covered wall of the academy, lowered his bamboo hat, and merged with the crowd on the street. He walked towards the gloomy sun over the snowy clouds. It didn't take long before he arrived at a very ordinary alley in the western part of the city. The alley was very short, but its location was excellent. Not far from it was the Li Palace, so there were many restaurants and restaurants. This alley was the fortune piece road written on the slip of paper. Qin Chongqing stood at the mouth of the alley and lowered his head to look at himself. After confirming that everything was in order, he slightly relaxed. He wore ordinary clothes, but they were washed very clean. Earlier in the Orthodox Academy, he had also washed himself very clean. On the bridge of helplessness, her fingertip had left a drop of blood between his eyebrows. Just as he had confirmed after leaving the Garden of Zhou, his blood no longer had any scent. After washing it 3 times, there was even less of a scent remaining. His body now only had the fresh and faint scent of soap leaf. His black hair was tied up very tightly. It was slightly damp and not completely dry. As it was blown by the wind of the winter streets, a thin layer of frost had formed on its surface. It was just like his current mood. Today, Tencent Academy gave me the honor of Novelist of the Year. I'm very honored and happy because of Falling Night's novel. In 2013, I took a break for half a year because of my health, so the latter half of Falling Night's novel didn't get the evaluation it deserved. In other words, I've always felt that Falling Night's novel is the most underrated among my novels. Now, apart from the great readers, I've gotten some new recognition. I'm really happy about this and I'm very grateful to Tencent Academy. Logically speaking, I should attend the awards ceremony and sit with Lu Cixin and take a few selfies. But as everyone knows, I've been busy this month and really didn't have the time. It's a pity. I've been very busy and tired today. That's all for this chapter. I'll go and sort out the details of the later chapters later. There will be 2 more chapters tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. Just take it that I've thanked you for nothing. Still, thank you. See you tomorrow. Chapter 526. Qin Chongqing walked into the alley. After a while, he walked out of the alley again. He stood at the mouth of the alley, seemingly at a loss, because he had walked through the alley twice and seen many restaurants, but he had not seen the fish with tofu mentioned on the slip of paper. Then wait for her to come? As he stood at the mouth of the alley, he suddenly had a thought. Could it be that in order to punish his stupidity, she was deliberately teasing him? Yes, that should be the case, or else why would she leave a non-existent address on the slip of paper? His mood was rather complex. The snow drifting down from the sky gradually grew heavier, and the pedestrians on the street began to move away. Because of the banquet in the Li Palace today, many people had gone to the Divine Avenue to watch the excitement. The restaurants on Fortune Peace Road did not have as much business as usual, and now seemed even more deserted. He did not leave, but waited at the mouth of the snowy alley. Lanterns hung on both sides of the Divine Avenue of the Li Palace. Snowflakes drifted down, and the number of people of the capital waiting to watch the excitement had somewhat decreased. Those people who had persisted, upon seeing the luxurious carriages from the manors of the various princes and dukes, still felt that this trip had not been in vain. The great hall of light, where the banquet was being held, was already filled with priests, ministers, and people from various halls and schools. Meanwhile, the quiet and secluded hall behind the great hall of light was still as quiet as usual. The Pope was participating in the banquet today, and his hemp clothes had already been changed into divine robes. His right hand held a ladle and was currently watering the green leaf in the pot. Seeing the green leaf grow stronger and stronger, a gratified smile appeared on the elder's face. He took a soft towel placed by the pot and lightly wiped his hands. The few times Chen Chongqing had come to the Li Palace, he had already noticed the change in the green leaf. He did not understand. Since the green leaf world was the same as the Garden of Zhou, a stable fragment of space that could not grow larger, was the Pope so meticulously protecting its growth just to make the door into the green leaf world more stable? Or was it to say that as the green leaf in the pot grew stronger and stronger, the door between the green leaf world and the original world would grow larger and larger? If this was the case, why did the Pope want the door to the green leaf world to grow larger? In the end, this matter is still too important. Your Holiness, do you not need to think a little more? Mao Qiuyu quietly stood behind the Pope, his expression very respectful, his sleeves not the slightest trembling. The Pope put down the towel and smiled. After listening to your account of the battle on the Bridge of Helplessness, I realized that this child is even more reliable than I imagined. You also said that purely in terms of potential and future prospects, it is truly difficult to find a better target than him. This being the case, I can also rest assured in passing the orthodoxy to him. Mao Qiuyu was silent for a while and said, Your Majesty is right, but Ling Hai and Si Yuan's cultivation and experience are far above Chen Chongqing's. Moreover, they were also carefully trained by you in the past. I think it will be very hard for them to accept this. The Pope walked back to the platform, took the divine crown from the glazed throne, and placed it on his head. However, he did not take up the divine staff that represented the authority of the orthodoxy. He slowly said, Consider me selfish. After all, the only legitimate successor of the orthodoxy is this child. Moreover, in the future, he will face the world's most difficult choice, the most perplexed helplessness, the most bone-piercing sorrow. Then this title, even if I offer it to him as a consolation, is also a reward that the orthodoxy should give him. Saying this, he slowly turned around and walked towards the ice-cold stone wall. As he walked forward, the stone wall slowly opened, releasing boundless light. This was a night pearl that had once illuminated the capital at the edge of the dew platform. Because of the wind and rain of time, it had gradually dimmed, so it had been taken down and placed in one of the halls of the imperial palace for illumination. Although this night pearl was no longer as dazzling as it had been at the beginning, it was still incomparably bright to the memorials on the desk. The Divine Empress was currently reading through the memorials, at the same time listening to those words echoing in the hall. The elderly chief eunuch stood with his body bowed. In a very gentle voice, he recounted the specific details of this morning's battle on the Bridge of Helplessness. The battle between Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong on the Bridge of Helplessness had occurred not long after dawn, but both the Pope and the Divine Empress had only sent someone to give a detailed report on this matter when it was almost dusk. This meant that, unlike the entire continent, these two saints actually did not care much about this battle. Although Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong were their most trusted juniors, and from a certain perspective, their successors, in their eyes, this was still a minor matter. The temple sword came from the sword pool, so little Principal Chen presumably had a backup plan. The Holy Maiden should have known about this beforehand and made preparations, but for some reason, she still wasn't able to subdue him in one strike. Chen Chongqing paid the price of an injury to his left shoulder to forcefully wrest control over the temple sword, and then unexpectedly blocked the Holy Maiden's rhino horn finger. If this was just a discussion of swords, he should have won by half a move, But if this was a true battle, if this continued, he probably wouldn't have any chance of victory, but the holy maiden just left like that. After saying this, the chief eunuch cautiously raised his head to glance, then retreated to the back. The divine empress's expression did not change. The chief eunuch did not raise his head to look, and the vast majority of the time, she did the same. In the battle on the Bridge of Helplessness, the talent and intelligence Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong displayed were enough to shock the vast majority of people, but not her. Only when she heard that Su Yurong had comprehended the sword of great light did she raise her brows, as if she had not expected it. Truly a stubborn girl. She threw the memorial on the table, stood up, and walked to the door of the hall. With her hands behind her back, she gazed at the faint light in the distant night sky. That place was probably the Li Palace. Just at this moment, Mou hurried over, her expression extremely grave. She reported what had just happened to her. The divine empress calmly gazed in the direction of the Li Palace, a faint smile on her lips, but her eyes were indifferent. It's getting more and more interesting. The battle on the Bridge of Helplessness had concluded, but it was very difficult for the discussion that had arisen from it to subside in such a short period of time. The main topic of discussion among the important figures in the Great Hall of Light still revolved around this matter. With the insight and cultivation levels of these important figures, once they calmed down and thought about it, they understood that Su Yurong had not used the true blood of the heavenly phoenix because she had intentionally suppressed herself to the level of a normal person. She wanted to rely on strength and not talent to defeat Chen Chongqing. However, this did not mean that they believed that Chen Chongqing had won with an unfair advantage. This was because they were keenly aware that Chen Chongqing had not used his most powerful technique, such as the method he had used to receive a blow from Zhu Sun in the rain in Xuanyang City, and not die. Just at this moment, the Great Hall of Light suddenly resounded with the solemn and benevolent music. The stone wall in the deepest part of the hall slowly opened, light spilling out in all directions. The stone sculptures on the two sides of the hall glowed with light. The people in the hall hurriedly tidied up their clothes and solemnly arranged themselves, respectfully bowing to the Pope as he walked through the stone wall into the light. Under the escort of the Grand Knight Captains and several archbishops, the Pope slowly walked onto the high platform. Daoist Xiyuan and Linghai Jiwang were naturally among them, while Archbishop Mao Chiyu of the Hall of Illustrious Persons stood at the very back. To everyone's astonishment, the divine staff that represented the authority of the orthodoxy was currently clasped in his two hands. Without any complicated or lengthy procedures, Mao Chiyu calmly began to read out the contributions Chen Chongqing had made for the orthodoxy. From the grand examination to the mausoleum of books, from the Garden of Zhou to this morning's battle on the Bridge of Helplessness, and even his admission as a new student of the Orthodox Academy, a matter that had originally been taboo to the orthodoxy, had become a stroke in his record of contributions. This had always been a celebratory feast for the orthodoxy, so it was naturally a celebration of Chen Chongqing's achievements. Mao Chiyu's reading of these was something that everyone had expected ahead of time, but no one besides Mao Chiyu and the Pope had expected what happened next. After Mao Chiyu finished reading out Chen Chongqing's achievements, he did not, as everyone had expected, directly announce the orthodoxy's reward. Instead, he calmly walked to the Pope's side. Under everyone's shocked gazes, the Pope extended his hand and took the divine staff, saying, "Bestow this blessing upon him." The Great Hall of Light was absolutely silent. No one spoke because they were all too shocked. Chen Chongqing was currently the principal of the Orthodox Academy. Long ago, he had been the Pope's martial nephew, but no one knew that after the Mausoleum of Books, the entire continent knew of the Pope's plans, knew that Chen Chongqing would become the next Pope. But in the end, this was only a guess, a deduction. Today was the day that the guess was confirmed, the deduction turned into reality. The Pope had given the divine staff, the symbol of the orthodoxy's authority, to Chen Chongqing. This was also announcing to the entire world that Chen Chongqing was his successor. The silence in the great hall of light continued. It was not because it was strange, nor did it mean that some great wave would occur. No one dared to defy the will of the Pope here, but they did not know how to respond. This was a matter of course, but it had happened much earlier than they had imagined. It was impossible for them not to be shocked. Chen Chongqing was only 16. Daoist Siyuan and Linghai Jiwang, who had once been regarded by the entire continent as the most promising candidates to receive the divine staff and inherit the position of Pope, had abnormally nasty complexions. They had originally believed that they still had 10-some years to change the Pope's will, but they had not expected that the Pope would not give them any time at all. They were keenly aware why the Pope had chosen this moment to confirm Chen Chongqing as his successor. In the past, the Orthodoxy's new faction, like them and their supporters, might have used the excuse that Chen Chongqing was too young and needed to be observed for a few more years to delay the Pope's decision. But the continent already had a 16-year-old holy maiden of the South, so what did it matter if another 16-year-old candidate for Pope appeared? And this candidate for Pope had just defeated the Holy Maiden of the South today. The silence in the hall continued. Gradually, the people began to feel that something was wrong. Even if they did not know how to react, what about Chen Chongqing? Even if he was also very shocked, he should have stood up and thanked the Pope for his blessing, and then accepted the blessings of the people in the hall. Mao Chuyu's gaze moved back and forth in the hall, his brow deeply creasing as he asked in disbelief, "Where's Chen Chongqing?" In a corner of the hall, a hand suddenly extended out from the crowd, accompanied by a rather uneasy voice. He was too happy at noon and ate too much. He has a bit of diarrhea, so he asked me to ask for a leave of absence for everyone. Tonight, during the Orthodoxy's celebration, the Pope personally bestowing the divine staff and confirming the successor to the Orthodoxy, the person in question was actually not present? The great hall of light was in an uproar. The crowd parted like water, revealing the person who had just spoken. Tang 36 lowered his head and raised his hand. The next chapter should be out before 12. Chapter 527. The previous chapter was called Asking for a Leave and Raise Your Hand. This was just the title of the chapter, not a real leave. It can't be that some students really thought I asked for a leave and got angry, right? Luckily I made it in time, so I didn't change this chapter. Tang 36's hand was raised very low, his head was also very low, and his voice was actually also very low. Although his face couldn't be seen, one could imagine how embarrassed he must have been. The crowd parted like a tide. No matter how embarrassed he was, as everyone knew that he was Chen Chongqing's good friend, especially with his status as the superintendent of the Orthodox Academy, coupled with the fact that Su Mo Yu and Xian Yuanpo were extremely insistent on turning their heads away, he could only walk forward, all the way until he reached the Pope. Mao Qiu-yu's expression was rather unsightly, but he forced himself not to reprimand him. The Pope's expression, however, was very calm, and he handed the divine staff to him. The divine staff was not as heavy as people imagined it to be, but Tang 36 felt that it was as heavy as a mountain, almost unable to bear it. He bent his knees and bowed in place of Chen Chongqing. He lowered his head, but he could still feel the gazes from all around him. Some of the gazes were astonished, some were disdainful, some were gratified, but even more were hostile, sharp as swords. He felt that he was very innocent, so he was very angry. Following Mao Qiu-yu's instructions, he said words of gratitude, but in his heart, he was incessantly cursing. These curses were naturally meant for the currently unknown Chen Chongqing to hear. The snowfall grew heavier and heavier. The streets had long since become devoid of people, and the alleys were constantly being lit. Chen Chongqing had already stood on Fortune Peace Road for a very long time. Looking at the color of the sky, he sighed in his heart. Snowy clouds obscured the sun, and the capital was somewhat dusky. One could only faintly tell from the brightness that the sun was currently moving towards the west, about to set. The time written on the paper was dusk, but the world at dusk was often rather blurry. Dusk itself was also a blurry concept. From the time the sun began to set until it completely sank below the horizon, there would always be an hour of time. Then was this still considered dusk? Had he arrived a little too early? Or was it that she really wasn't coming? He thought that if she did not come when it was completely dark, then he would leave. Just at this moment, a very loud sound came from the distance, vaguely coming from the direction of the Lee Palace. He had absolutely no idea what had happened, much less that it had anything to do with him. In the wind and snow, he rubbed his hands, sometimes looking in the direction of the imperial palace, sometimes looking in the direction of the divine general of the East's estate. There was a problem with his meridians, so the amount of true essence that he could output was insufficient. However, the amount of true essence in his body was actually very abundant, so he was not afraid of the cold at all. The reason why he kept rubbing his hands and occasionally stamping his feet was completely because of his mood. The sky gradually darkened and was about to turn dark. He had also given up all hope. At this moment, a voice rang out from some distance behind him. "Why are you standing here?" Hearing this voice, his body stiffened. He turned around and saw a man holding an umbrella slowly walking over from the alley behind him. The umbrella looked a little old and seemed a little strange. In the dim light, it isolated the area under the umbrella, making it difficult to see what was under the umbrella. Ordinary people might not even be able to see it, but Chen Chongqing could because he was very familiar with this umbrella. This umbrella should have been his. So this umbrella was obviously the yellow paper umbrella. Like a fallen leaf in the snow, the yellow paper umbrella slowly arrived in front of him, then slightly tilted backwards, revealing Su Yurong's face. A face that was very difficult to describe with words, a face that could only be described with the cliché word perfect. Looking at this extremely beautiful, and indeed very unfamiliar face, Chen Chongqing was somewhat nervous, somewhat absent-minded. He looked into her eyes and found that familiar calm and indifference. Only then did he finally relax. He was familiar with her voice and also familiar with her eyes. When their gazes met, the unfamiliarity disappeared, as if the two had once again returned to the Garden of Zhou. Through life and death together, accompanying each other day and night, sitting and discussing the Tao, rising to meet the enemy, overturning everything as before, growing old together. Overturning the umbrella, everything as before. But was there a need to talk about growing old together now? Chen Chongqing suddenly thought of these words and felt very awkward. At this moment, he still did not know that in the Li Palace, there was someone even more awkward than him. "Why are you standing here? Didn't we say we were going to eat fish with tofu?" Different from Chen Chongqing's current nervousness, Su Yurong had always known that he was him. Several dozen days was enough for her to calm down. Moreover, they had truly spent too much time together in the Garden of Zhou. When she saw him, she really could not find him unfamiliar, much less show any sense of distance. "I went into the alley and searched twice, but I couldn't find the fish with tofu you spoke of," said Chen Chongqing. Su Yurong stared blankly, then looked into the alley. "With some regret," she said, "I haven't returned for 3 years and it's actually gone. That restaurant's fish is really not bad. How did you get here from that side?" Chen Chongqing pointed at the alley that she had come from and asked. That alley was not the path from the imperial palace, nor was it the path from the divine general of the East's estate, so he had not discovered it. "I went to the little orange garden and waited for a while. Mou didn't come back, so I came over a little late." As she said this, Su Yurong's eyelashes fluttered, her gaze lowered, and her cheeks flushed red. Before she went to the rendezvous, she suddenly remembered that this was her first private meeting with Chen Chongqing. The Garden of Zhou naturally did not count, so she suddenly felt a little embarrassed. She also remembered that she had taken the initiative to invite him on the bridge of helplessness, so she did not want anyone to think badly of her, so she suddenly thought of bringing Mou along. Who knew that Mou would not be there? She also did not know whether to feel regret or rejoice. In short, to her, these matters were much more complicated than comprehending the heavenly tome monolith. The sky was too dark, so Chen Chongqing did not see her expression. He was very slow in this aspect, so he naturally could not think of why she would go to the little orange garden to find Mou. He only thought that today's goal was to invite her to a meal, so he asked with some uncertainty, "Why don't we eat something else in the alley, or go somewhere else?" "Let's eat here." Su Yurong handed over the handle of the umbrella. Chen Chongqing very naturally took it. There was no need for words, not even a need for a glance. The act of handing over and receiving the umbrella was very natural, as if he had done it countless times. This was because they had truly done this action countless times in the Garden of Zhou, in the plains of the unsetting sun, when they encountered monsters, when they were in a hurry to travel. The vast majority of the time, it was her on his back, the umbrella in her hand. When she was tired, she would hand the umbrella over to him. Chen Chongqing held the umbrella, walking shoulder to shoulder with her into the snowy alley. Perhaps the speed at which time changed things in the world was not much faster than flowing water, but to change the restaurants on a street was extremely easy. Fortune Peace Road had long since ceased to be famous for its fish with tofu, but rather for its stewed bones in an iron pot. In this short alley, there were 5 stewed bones in an iron pot. The signs outside all had the words "Authentic Big Bones of Chi City," but it was hard to tell which one was the real one. The steam from the iron pots seeped out from these restaurants, mixing with the rich aroma of meat. In this cold winter, it was incomparably alluring. Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong did not fear the cold, but rather yearned for this sort of feeling. They found a restaurant that seemed a little cleaner and walked in. The stewed bones in an iron pot were all in Kong pot. When the thick cotton curtain was lifted, a wave of heat greeted them. Today's business was rather quiet. Normally, the restaurant was bustling with activity, but now there was only one Kong table with customers. The customers in this sort of situation were naturally the true diners. Their attention was completely focused on the fragrant bones and wine, and they did not even notice the young man and woman that had entered. Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong walked to the innermost part of the restaurant, but before they could even sit down, they suddenly heard the sound of a fierce quarrel behind them. A customer heavily placed his bowl of wine on the table and angrily said, "Miss Yurong beat that Chen Chongqing like a dog, how could she lose?" Another customer sneered, "Then why did Miss Yurong concede?" That customer's face was completely red, and he choked out a few words. "That's because she couldn't forget her old love. She remembered that Chen Chongqing was once her fiancé, so she went easy on him." The boss, who was in the kitchen, heard the quarrel and hurriedly came over to mediate. With great difficulty, he managed to pacify these customers, and then he saw 2 new customers in the shadows in the corner. The young man and woman did not sit down, and the atmosphere was rather awkward. He couldn't help but feel that it was very strange, thinking, "What does the quarrel of others have to do with you?" Chapter 528. This store's Kong table was very clean, even the edges of the Kong that easily collected dust could not be seen. However, Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong did not sit down. Hearing the quarrel coming from behind them, they could not help but feel a little awkward. Only when the owner walked over did the atmosphere ease up. Maybe it was because of the yellow paper umbrella, or maybe it was because the corner was a little dark, but the owner did not recognize them. He smiled and asked, "What would you 2 like to eat? The main dish of this store is all kinds of bones. What do you like to eat?" Chen Chongqing looked at Su Yurong sitting across from him, wanting to hear her opinion. Su Yurong lowered her head and did not say anything. "How about you 2 first have a bowl of pork bone soup to warm your body, and then slowly think?" The owner increasingly felt that this young man and woman were a little strange, but running a restaurant in the capital, he had seen who knows how many strange situations, so he naturally would not be nosy. Hearing a certain word in the owner's words, Chen Chongqing felt his face become a little hot again. He waved his hand and said, "Let's not, how about beef bones?" The second half of this sentence was obviously asking for Su Yurong's opinion. Su Yurong did not have any objections, but thinking back to their conversation in the garden of Zhou, she did not remember him having any taboos about eating pork. Why did he have such a big reaction? She could not help but feel a little curious. The owner was a very straightforward person. He made up his mind to add a few dishes for them, then went to the kitchen to prepare, leaving only the two of them at the Kong table in the corner. Su Yurong slightly blinked her eyes, cutting off the quarrel at the table in front of her, then looked at him and asked the question in her heart. "It's not that I have any taboos, it's just—" Chen Chongqing hesitated for a while, then very honestly said, "Tang 36 said I am a pig, and I really think I am a pig, so I don't want to eat pork right now." Su Yurong knew the meaning of his words, and could not help but smile. She suddenly thought of something, frowned and said, "You told Tang Tang?" "No, he called me a pig because of something else," Chen Chongqing explained. After saying this, the area around the Kong table became quiet again. The guests at that table were still arguing fiercely, but no sound could be heard. Even the sound of the wind and snow outside the restaurant could not be heard. All that could be heard was the crackling of the firewood in the Kong. In reality, this sound could not be heard by ordinary people. "What that person said is wrong," Yi Zichen said. Su Yurong glanced at the Kong table, then turned her head to look at him, and explained very seriously, "On the bridge of helplessness, I didn't hold back. I was very serious." She had to make this clear, because it was the truth, and because it represented her respect towards Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing said, "Although I calculated a draw, my talent and comprehension are not as good as yours. If I don't use all my strength, I can't do it. I just want to fight you fair and square." Su Yurong calmly replied, "Whether it's in the garden of Zhou or in the future, I probably won't have this opportunity, so after entering the capital, I didn't go find you." At this moment, Chen Chongqing finally understood why she had been hiding it from him. One of them was the candidate for Pope, while the other was the newly appointed Holy Maiden. Moreover, they represented the orthodoxy and the imperial court, two great powers. No matter how one looked at it, they were innately enemies, but if he knew of her true identity, there would naturally be no such intense battle on the bridge of helplessness. From now until a long time in the future, there would be no such thing. It was impossible for him to be her enemy, and he believed that it was the same for her. "But you still didn't use your strongest move." Chen Chongqing looked at her and said, "If I'm not wrong, in the garden of Zhou, your innate bloodline awakened once more." Su Yurong replied, "Yes." Chen Chongqing said, "If you really used the bloodline of the heavenly phoenix, I wouldn't be your match." Su Yurong asked, "Do you really want to be defeated by me so much?" Chen Chongqing hesitated, then said, "Actually, I just wanted to see how you would look with your phoenix wings. I thought that it would be very beautiful." There were many things that truly did not need teaching, did not need Tang 36's guidance. Even the most inarticulate person would occasionally say very beautiful words. In front of the person he wanted to express his kindness and affection. Su Yurong thought, "You've seen it before, but you were asleep at the time." Because of Chen Chongqing's extremely rare beautiful words, she was somewhat unaccustomed and somewhat bashful. Changing the topic, she said, "You also only used one sword." She knew better than anyone else in the world that all the swords of the sword pool were in Chen Chongqing's sheath. That was his true strongest move. "Even if I used 10,000 swords at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily be able to directly contend against your sword of great light." Chen Chongqing looked into her eyes and sighed with admiration. "You really are very outstanding." Su Yurong looked into his eyes and sighed helplessly. "You really didn't feel it?" "Feel what?" the blade intent hidden in the sword of great light. Hearing this, Chen Chongqing was very shocked. He thought, the sword of great light is the most profound sword style in the world. What blade intent can control it? I used the having blade technique, transforming blade intent into sword intent, so that I could just barely use the sword of great light. Su Yorong said, I still have to thank you for the clash of sword intents at the time, or else I wouldn't have been able to grasp this sword style in a few short days. Hearing the 4 words, having blade technique, Chen Chongqing was even more shocked. He thought, wasn't the having blade technique temporarily unusable? Only after hearing the second half of her words did he understand. Although he had never used the having blade technique before, the having blade technique was extremely tyrannical and wild. It was still forcefully concealed within his sword intent. On the bridge of helplessness, Su Yorong had precisely combined the blade technique she had grasped with the blade intent he exuded. Finally, she had comprehended a bit of blade intent, allowing her to display the sword of great light. In the eyes of many, the battle on the bridge of helplessness that had begun this morning represented many things. Who could have thought that, for Su Yorong, besides fighting to her heart's content, the battle on the bridge of helplessness was also an excellent opportunity to help her comprehend the mysterious technique of the having blade technique and subsequently grasp the sword of great light. When Chen Chongqing thought of this, he couldn't help but feel admiration for her, but he also felt that it was somewhat inappropriate. He thought, why is there a need to be so anxious and even somewhat dangerous? If, in the battle on the bridge of helplessness, she was unable to comprehend the essence of the having blade technique, unable to grasp the sword of great light, and if he were to make a slight mistake, how terrifying would that be? There was no need for words. Seeing the worry in his eyes, Su Yorong knew what he was thinking. She calmly said, I am the youngest holy maiden in history, and also the weakest holy maiden. Teacher has left, and the Empress is still a person of Zhou, so I need to establish my might as quickly as possible. These words were very plain, even somewhat crude, but very sincere. The vast majority of holy maidens of the South would enter the divine domain, and her teacher was a saint who could easily defeat the storms of the 8 directions. Even the weakest holy maidens of the South were at least experts half a step into the divine. Only she had become holy maiden at the age of 16, not even breaking through to star condensation. As the youngest and weakest holy maiden of the South in history, holy maiden Peak and Nan, she were both speechless. What sort of pressure did she have to endure? What sort of trials and tribulations did she have to face? Chen Chongqing looked at her somewhat thin and weak shoulders and suddenly thought of the conversation in the garden of Zhou. At the time, she had said that she bore a very heavy responsibility and felt that it was very difficult, so she wanted to avoid it. He had thought that she was a young genius of the elf race, shouldering the heavy responsibility of reviving the elf race. He had tried to console her several times. But now he knew that she was the reincarnation of the heavenly phoenix, the hope of Holy Maiden Peak and the Divine Empress, shouldering the responsibility of resisting the demons for the entire human world. How could he console her? There are some things that, in the future, just let me handle them. I can do it. I am the principal of the Orthodox Academy. In the future, I will become the Pope of the Orthodoxy. He thought these words over in his mind and organized the sequence. He felt that it was Tang 36's tone, and just when he was hesitating, authentic beef ribs, please enjoy. The owner carried a steaming pot of beef ribs, interrupting an important conversation concerning the future of the human world. Unlike the stewed ribs of other restaurants, this restaurant's ribs were stewed in the back of the kitchen before being served. Although it lost some of the flavor of a farmer, it was much cleaner. It was no wonder that the surroundings of the stove and pot were so clean that not even a speck of dust could be seen. Soon after, all sorts of appetizers were served and the two began to eat. Perhaps it was because the appetizers were too delicious, or perhaps the ribs were too fragrant and too troublesome to eat, but Chen Chongsheng and Su Yorong did not speak for a very long time. In this quiet corner, the only sound that could be heard was the crackling of firewood under the Kong and the occasional clatter of chopsticks and bowls. After some time, Chen Chongsheng could not help but raise his head and look across at her. Only now did he realize that today she was not wearing that white ceremonial robe, nor was she wearing a white dress, but rather a rather thick cotton jacket. He also recalled that in Xuanyang City, when he saw the Holy Maiden, he had felt that the white ceremonial robe was rather familiar. Then he recalled that in the temple by the white grass path, she had said that ever since she was a child, the rules of eating were very strict and that she could not speak. The current silence should be the environment she was used to? Then let's eat according to her habits. At the very least, it won't make her feel uncomfortable. Chen Chongsheng thought this, but he did not pick up his chopsticks again. Instead, he continued to look at her. Because she truly was very beautiful. The steam rising from the pot was very similar to the fog and rain on the Bridge of Helplessness. Her small face, on the other side of the fog, was incomparably beautiful, like a painting. But at this moment she did not seem like the phoenix fairy of the rumors. Her small body seemed to be completely wrapped up in a cotton jacket. The splendor that had appeared before 10,000 people had been completely restrained, making her seem like an ordinary little girl. She lowered her head and lightly breathed out hot air. She very carefully nibbled on the ribs. Her appearance was very cute, just like a young beast. The crudest of stewed ribs in the pot was actually eaten delicately by her, as if she was now carefully tasting exquisite southern pastries. But no matter how delicately she ate, her speed was not slow. In a short while, the table in front of her was piled high with extremely clean ribs. Her face was somewhat red, perhaps because of the heat, or because she was embarrassed, or perhaps because she felt that he was unwilling to shift his gaze. Today's chapter. In addition, I'll give you an early warning. In the next 2 days, I plan to let them continue dating. Chapter 529. In the end, the reason was the latter. Su Yurong raised her head to look at Chen Chongsheng and asked, "Why aren't you eating?" "Oh, I'm eating." Because of Tang 36's influence in the past 2 years, Chen Chongsheng had become much more talkative, but in front of her, he seemed to have returned to that honest young Taoist from Xining village. His words were extremely simple, his thoughts exceptionally pure, unable to conceal any of his emotions. For example, he was somewhat confused right now, so when he picked up the chopsticks, he almost lost his grip. He stretched out his hand like the wind and caught the chopsticks in midair, but he pushed the yellow paper umbrella to the side. Thus, the quarrel that was still going on at the Kong table in front of them once again reached their ears. Last spring, when little Principal Chen first entered the capital, he suffered such humiliation in the Divine General's estate. Afterwards, he was repeatedly suppressed. He was clearly extremely talented, his grades excellent, but he was forcibly removed from the enrollment list of all the schools. If not for His Holiness's secret protection, he probably wouldn't even have been able to enter the Orthodox Academy that had long since declined. All of you say that breaking off the engagement was a heartless act, but have you ever thought that if the Su family had not been so shameless, how could this marriage have become like this? What does this have to do with Miss Yurong? At the Ivy Festival, the White Crane returned north. In that letter, she had already acknowledged this engagement. Otherwise, how could just Chen Chongsheng holding the marriage contract make the Southern diplomatic mission speechless? Even if Chen Chongsheng holds a grudge against the Divine General's estate, he has no reason to let Miss Yurong suffer such humiliation. Su Shiji had always been unwilling to acknowledge this marriage. The people of the Divine General of the East's estate despise the poor and favor the rich. But now, little Principal Chen is completely different, turning around and wanting to hug his thigh. Truly shameless to the extreme. All of you say that little Principal Chen breaking off the engagement is a humiliation? In my view, This is just the divine general of the East's estate humiliating itself. But in the end, this matter has nothing to do with the holy maiden. Why should she have to bear all these rumors? It can only be said that the holy maiden is unfortunate to be born in this sort of estate and to have such parents. The Kong table in the corner became very quiet. The meat juice in the iron pot gurgled. Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong sat on either side of the Kong. The atmosphere became heavy again. It had been almost 2 years since he came to the capital. That engagement had long since spread throughout the continent. The humiliation and suppression that the divine general of the East's estate had once given him, the change in attitude, and how he had transformed from a young Taoist priest from the countryside to the successor of the orthodoxy were topics that everyone took delight in discussing. The battle on the Bridge of Helplessness this morning seemed to be the final conclusion of this story, or perhaps the conclusion. However, it was not truly able to end everything. On the contrary, it pushed people's interest in this story to a peak. Presumably, just like the diners at that table, at this moment, in the countless family banquets in the capital, everyone was presumably discussing this matter. He had never forgotten the humiliation he had received from the divine general's estate. He had also felt many emotions towards her when she was far away in the south. However, just as the guest had said, she had never truly harmed him in this matter. Yet, she now had to bear the ridicule and blame from the divine general's estate. This might be a little unfair. Chen Chongqing didn't know what to say. After all, they are my parents. Su Yorong's expression was very calm, as though she was not affected by those discussions. Her following words, however, took a sudden turn. I want to drink some wine. Okay. Chen Chongqing had the innkeeper bring out 2 small jars of the best wine. He opened the clay seal on one of the jars and filled her bowl to 70%. Su Yorong softly expressed her thanks and opened the other jar of wine. She filled his bowl to the brim and then looked at him. Tell me. Chen Chongqing still didn't know what to say. After thinking it over, he looked at her beautiful face and hesitantly asked, Face? Some sort of technique from South Stream Temple. Oh. After these 2 simple sentences, the Kong once more fell silent. Su Yorong raised her bowl of wine and took a small sip. It was only a small sip, but her face slightly reddened. Don't tell anyone that we met in the garden of Zhou. Why? When Chen Chongqing had heard her request on the Bridge of Helplessness, he had not understood. Now that he had confirmed that she really did not want anyone else to know about this matter, he became even more confused. Su Yorong did not directly answer his question. She softly said, Hasn't the engagement already been annulled? This was a rumor that had been circulating in the capital for a very long time. It had never been acknowledged by the Tradition Academy or the Divine General of the East's estate. But as one of the parties involved in the engagement, she naturally knew that the rumor was not a rumor. It was something that had already happened. Chen Chongqing did not speak for a very long time. When the snowy wind on the bridge blew away the white gauze and he saw her eyes, that was the happiest moment of his 16 years. Compared to when he memorized the last Taoist scripture in the old temple, found the fated star in the Tradition Academy, obtained first place on the first banner in the grand examination, and found Wang Jisu's notebook in the pavilion of ascending mist, he was happier. So she was still alive. She was her. She was his fiancée. Was there anything more bizarre than this in the world? Was there anything better than this? When he was bathing in the small building of the Tradition Academy, he had already thought it over. He would go to the Li Palace and ask the Pope to repair the marriage contract. Then, he would bring Tang 36 and the others directly to the Imperial Palace to find her. If she agreed, he would directly propose to her. He had never experienced love, but as long as he was sure that something was what he wanted to do, he would definitely do it with extreme seriousness and focus, seizing every minute. But now, she was saying that this matter could not be told to anyone. Then how could he convince the Pope to rescind the decree annulling the engagement? A month ago, He had worked extremely hard to finally annul this engagement. Now, he realized that he very much needed this engagement. Tang 36 was very right. I thought you were dead. Back then in the Garden of Zhou, I promised you that I would annul this engagement, so… He looked at Su Yorong and said somewhat helplessly, since you knew it was me, why didn't you tell me earlier? Su Yorong's expression was slightly cold. In the Garden of Zhou, you lied to me. I was the one who discovered the truth, so why did I tell you? Chen Chongqing felt very innocent and asked, when did I lie to you? Don't tell me you're called Su Xing? You are also not Lady Chujian. Why didn't you admit that you were Chen Chongqing? Back then, why didn't you say that you were Su Yorong? They looked into each other's eyes and practically asked this question at the same time. Then they remembered that back then, in the snowy temple by the white grass path, when they announced their names for the first time, they also said two fake names at the same time. It was unknown what they were thinking at the time. Chen Chongqing recalled his mood at the time. The main reason he didn't want her to know his identity was because he didn't want her to know that he had a world-famous fiancée. Perhaps Su Yorong also thought this way at the time and didn't want him to know that she had a world-famous fiancé? Is it very embarrassing to have a fiancé like me? He looked at Su Yorong and asked. He was somewhat serious, but also somewhat bitter and sad. After lying in bed for an entire day, the sky was dark. I said that I wouldn't say the reason for taking a day off. Today I didn't, so I said that my cold is a bit heavy. I wish everyone a happy holiday and good health. Chapter 530. Of course, that couldn't be the reason. Chen Chongqing recalled the scene in the snowy temple and quickly rejected this question. He then thought of another important question. Su Yorong had said back then that she was called Chen Chujian. Her surname was Chen. Perhaps it was a bit wishful thinking, but he always felt that it was related to him, just like how he had told her back then that he was called Su Xing. He asked no more questions, because he realized that this matter truly was rather chaotic. If he continued to investigate the situation in the Garden of Zhou, he was afraid that he would develop some unpleasant feelings towards Su Yorong's fiancée. Would that also be tantamount to being jealous of him? This matter truly was rather chaotic and incomprehensible. One had been well versed in the Taoist canon since childhood and had all the principles at her fingertips, while the other had a tranquil Tao heart and had begun to study the heavenly tome monoliths at the age of 12. Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong were the cream of the crop, both geniuses of cultivation. However, when they had dealt with this matter in the Garden of Zhou, they had been very flustered and had made many mistakes. Su Yorong didn't answer Chen Chongqing's stupid question. The beef ribs in the iron pot were still gurgling. In the quiet morning, they looked at each other and knew why the two of them hid their identities at that time. They didn't miss the slightest change of emotions at that time. In the end, they were still smart children, just like those pure white snowflakes outside the restaurant. But there were still some matters that needed to be resolved, or else their hearts would always feel somewhat uncomfortable, such as that matter. You, Princess Luoluo, and the little black dragon? Su Yorong did not explain, but Chen Chongqing understood what she was asking. Back in the mausoleum of Zhou, she had once said that her fiancé was a womanizer, and the ones he provoked were all ignorant girls. Chen Chongqing suddenly remembered that he had once cursed her fiancé, truly a shameless scum. As it turned out, he had been cursing him. When he thought of this, his mood became rather complex. He had no idea what to say, so he could only sigh. Presumably, it was Lady Schwanger who said it? The truth that had only been revealed after half a year had dealt a massive blow to his mind, so much so that he had not noticed that besides Luoluo, Su Yorong had also mentioned the little black dragon. He somewhat helplessly explained, I think that the two of us now understand the principle that what the eyes see is not necessarily the truth. Perhaps, Su Yorong said softly. Then, she raised her head and looked at him. A bright light suddenly flashed in her eyes. She raised her eyebrows slightly as she thought of something. As a result, the ethereal mountains and rivers in her picturesque beauty became vivid in an instant, and the brightness became sharp. I remember you said that your fiancé, Chen Chongqing's expression subtly changed. At the time in the mausoleum of Zhou, when he had described his fiancée to her, although he had not intentionally mocked or humiliated her, he had not said anything nice either. It was just that, didn't you say it yourself that it's better not to have this kind of woman? He couldn't help but argue. Su Yorong said, I was misled by your words. At that time, she had a very low evaluation of Su Xing's fiancé in her heart. She even felt that it was shameful. She was arrogant, stupid, had bad taste, and had moral problems. When she found out that all these comments were about her, she couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed and annoyed. At that time, the more critical her evaluation was, the more humiliated she became. Don't be fooled by her calm expression right now. Her small hands in the sleeves of her cotton-padded jacket had already clenched into fists. This matter was still very messy. Chen Chongqing looked at the wine in his bowl and sighed once more. When he was 10, a strange fragrance had enveloped the old temple. He had been silent for many days, and then he had sighed for many days. From then on, he had never sighed as much as he did today. Everything was a misunderstanding. The affairs of the world, encounters, were sometimes very coincidental, very inconceivable. There had always been so many grudges between the two of them, but in the end, they had met in the garden of Zhou under a different identity, and then spent so many days together. Fortunately, they had finally met again. Presumably, there would still be many things that would clarify these inexplicable and inexplicable matters. As long as they did not cause a lifelong misunderstanding, it was fine. Thinking of this, Chen Chongqing was no longer so worried. He looked at her and smiled. What are you smiling about? Su Yorong asked. Chen Chongqing replied, being happy. Su Yorong's gaze drooped, her eyelashes trembling. Suddenly, she covered her mouth with her hand and hiccuped. I drank too much, she explained with some embarrassment. The alcohol content of this wine was rather high. In a situation where she did not use her true essence to dissolve the alcohol, she had drunk several bowls in succession, so she truly should have been drunk. Otherwise, why would her beautiful face blush again? Chen Chongqing asked with concern, Are your wounds all right? Is drinking all right? As he spoke, his gaze fell on the sleeve of her cotton jacket. Looking at the finger that had just poked out of the sleeve, he realized that there was no wound there. Then he remembered that she had once studied in the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and was now the Holy Maiden of South Stream Temple. Under the sacred light, there was no need for her to worry about such problems. Su Yorong glanced at him and said, You really think that I can't beat you? Chen Chongqing thought to himself, How did we get into this again? Changing the subject, he said, I have something important to tell you. Su Yorong lightly flicked her finger. With a gust of wind, the yellow paper umbrella slowly rolled back to its original position. There were now 2 more tables of guests in the restaurant than before, and it was even noisier. At this moment, the sounds from outside could no longer be heard, and the occasional gazes would be blocked by that invisible wall. With the yellow paper umbrella and her and Chen Chongqing's current cultivation levels, unless a powerful expert at the peak of star condensation came to personally eavesdrop, they would definitely be discovered. Do you still remember when we found a lot of gold, silver, and other treasures in those stone huts in the mausoleum of Zhou? Chen Chongqing took the stainless sword from his waist and placed it next to the pot. Then, he began to take things out from inside. This was Su Yorong's first time seeing this treasure of the orthodoxy at such a close distance. This was not the stainless sword, but the sheath called the vault sheath. She looked at it very seriously, very interested, so much so that she did not pay much attention to Chen Chongqing's solemn words and casually gave a grunt of agreement. Before Nank brought the soul wood and drove the monster tide to surround the mausoleum, the soul pivot began to go crazy and broke many things. Those pills had already lost their effectiveness, so it doesn't matter if they're destroyed. It's just that those secret manuals are a bit of a pity. Oh, and then there's the jade and crystals. After they were crushed into powder, they weren't worth much. The gold was still all right. Later on, I asked someone to melt it into liquid gold and cast it into smaller pieces, so there wasn't too much damage. This is pearls. I heard that pearl powder can be used to make tea and can beautify one's appearance, so I won't divide it. In a while, you can take it all with you. Chen Chongqing kept on taking things and talking nonstop. Su Yorong's attention was finally drawn over. Looking at the boxes by the stove, she asked, "What did you say?" "This is what we agreed on, that the things in the mausoleum of Zhou would be evenly divided." Chen Chongqing looked at her and very seriously said, "If the pills could still be used, then when Senior Suli was injured, I probably would have used some, but as for the other things, I didn't get your consent, so I kept them all. It's just that for the sake of keeping them more convenient, I asked the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education to help me exchange them for silver notes and a few other things." He was speaking from the bottom of his heart. He had always believed that the treasures in the mausoleum of Zhou did not belong to him alone. Before he could confirm whether she was alive or dead, he had no right to use them. Thus, when Tang 36 had asked him for silver, he had not said that he had this wealth. And when he believed that she had already left this world, he had made a decision that was even more incomprehensible. This is the title deed. I asked Jin Yulu to exchange it for a large grassland in the lower reaches of the Red River, prepared to leave it for you, he said, pointing at a box. Startled, Su Yorong asked, "Why did you give this to me?" Chen Chongqing replied, "At the time, I thought that you might not be around anymore, so I had to leave something for your tribe. That grassland is the closest to your homeland. At the time, he had always believed that she was a genius girl of the elf race, shouldering the heavy responsibility of reviving the elf race." Su Yorong understood, but said nothing. Chen Chongqing misunderstood her silence, and said somewhat embarrassedly, "Of course, now that I know that you have no use for this grassland, this matter was truly rather muddled. No, it's pretty good. I like it very much." Su Yorong took the box and looked at his face reflected in the steam from the pot, speaking very seriously. Back in the mausoleum of Zhou, he had not cared about those treasures or secret manuals at all. He had only been anxious to find medicine for her. At the time, she had been very moved. Now she was the same. "I'll leave the other things with you for now. I didn't bring the Tong Palace today, so it's not convenient to carry it." She used a very natural tone to continue, "When I need it, I'll come find you." This was a very good arrangement, and Chen Chongqing very much approved of it. However, he thought about how she was now the master of South Stream Temple and had countless places to spend money, so he said, "I'll leave the other miscellaneous items with me for now, but you can take the pearl powder and the box of silver notes back with you." Su Yorong replied, "They're all worldly possessions, so there's no need to care so much about them." Chen Chongqing could not understand this sort of otherworldly attitude towards life. He asked, "Then what should we care about? How could she truly be otherworldly?" It was just that compared to the flames of the mortal world, the vast sky of stars was even brighter and more dazzling. "What we should care about is, we are opponents, enemies." Su Yorong looked into his eyes and spoke. Her voice was very calm, but the emotions in her eyes were rather complex. The starlight in their deepest depths faintly trembled. It was beautiful, yet it also made one feel somewhat uneasy. Yes, regardless of whether the two of them had that engagement or not, they were now destined to be opponents, and in the future, they might even become mortal enemies. The division between the North and the South of the Orthodoxy, the struggle between the old and the new, the Divine Empress and the Pope's differing views of the world. The three most important contradictions of the human world now rested on the shoulders of the two of them. Above and below the balcony and the poisoned dagger, the lonely grave on the yellow sands and the bleak cold of the butterfly? No matter how one looked at it, the story of Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong would ultimately develop in that direction. It could be sorrowful, it could be tragic, it could become a love story passed down through the ages. In short, this matter was very worrying. He and she were still so young, and their shoulders were still rather thin and weak. How could they carry so much weight? But the two of them seemed to have no such awareness. They had just fought on the bridge of helplessness, and then they sat down together to drink wine and eat bones. Especially Chen Chongqing. It was like he was completely unaware of the current situation, as if he had forgotten all the difficulties and dangers that lay between the two of them, because I forgot, he somewhat embarrassedly said. I've changed the last sentence of the previous chapter a little, changing the description of the final mood to serious. I feel that this would be a little more accurate. The love and mood swings of young people should be greater, but in the end, Chen Su is not an ordinary person. As for the problem of the treasures in the mausoleum of Zhou, I told everyone that I would think of a way to get them back. This chapter has mentioned it, and it fits the tone of the story of choosing the heavens. Of course, it can't stand up to too much scrutiny, because after leaving the Garden of Zhou, I really did forget to write about it. I've admitted it, and I'm sorry again. The next chapter will come out rather quickly. Chapter 531. This was a very speechless answer. Just like Tang 36 said, Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong were two people that made people speechless. Perhaps because of this, after Su Yurong heard Chen Chongqing's answer, she wasn't too surprised, nor was she angry, but rather satisfied. He only remembered that after dusk, he would come to Fortune Peace Road to eat fish with tofu, though in the end, he only ate beef ribs. He only remembered the words he had said in the mausoleum of Zhou, so he had divided the gold and silver into two piles and used the majority of it to exchange for the plain downstream of the Red River. Though she had no relationship with the elf race, he only remembered that he had promised her to end the engagement, so he had not hesitated to be criticized by the people of the capital to ask His Holiness the Emperor to forcefully end the engagement. Though this matter now seemed very foolish, and he was in a rush to find that marriage contract, it was not important to get some things wrong, and it was not important to forget some things. It was fine as long as he remembered some things. Because of Chen Chongqing's answer and the fragrant beef ribs in the iron pot, Su Yurong didn't regret her action of handing over the slip of paper on the bridge of helplessness. She said softly, "I ate very well, thank you." After saying this, she stood up and put away the plane. She picked up the yellow paper umbrella from the ground and walked out of the store. Chen Chongqing was slightly startled. Seeing her lift the curtain and walk out, he suddenly remembered that he forgot to give her the most important thing. He hurriedly chased after her. The cold wind blew against his face and snowflakes floated on the street at night. How could he still see her figure? He looked at the string of beads made of 10 stones on his wrist and thought to himself, I can't forget such an important thing next time. The shop owner's voice came from the side, Sir, there's still half a pot of beef ribs left. Do you want to take it away or eat a little longer? Chen Chongqing turned around and saw that the shopkeeper's expression was a bit uneasy. After a moment of hesitation, he realized that the shopkeeper was worried that Chen Chongqing would go back on his word. The shopkeeper rubbed his hands and looked at him nervously. Carrying the packed beef ribs, Chen Chongqing returned to the Tradition Academy. The winter forest by the lake seemed a little sinister in the night. Fortunately, the snow on the branches diluted the feeling. From the depths of the forest came a low, thunderous sound. Occasionally, a few extremely thin, lightning-like streaks of light would float out. That was Xian Yuan Po cultivating. Su Mou was in the library giving guidance to the new students. Zhexiu, whose injuries were gradually healing, was under some pile of snow, grinding his spirit and willpower. Only Tang 36 had not gone anywhere, nor was he in his own room, but was waiting for him in Chen Chongqing's room. Not only because he was very curious about Chen Chongqing's whereabouts, nor was he in his own room, but also because he wanted to, but also because Chen, but because because he Yu Chun and because he had. Because if and because and churn and if and chong yang one and chun chong yang and chun the chong chong chun and chong and he. Tang 36 had already sat in his room for a very long time, thinking about that embarrassing scene in the Li Palace, thinking about those gazes that were like real sword. Even now, he still felt that his back was somewhat sore, and thinking about where Chen Chong Xing was enjoying himself, his mood was getting worse and worse. So when Chen Chong Xing returned to his room, what he saw was, of course, a very ugly face. For some reason, perhaps because he was hiding the truth, Chen Chong Xing felt uneasy when he saw his face. He placed the lunchbox on the table and pretended not to see Tang 36 sitting on his bed. He pretended that he had no misophobia and very carefully said, "The beef ribs of Fortune Peace Road taste pretty good. His Holiness the Pope's divine staff tastes even better." No matter how ugly Tang 36's face was, it couldn't be any uglier, but the anger represented by his deliberate indifference was very easy to see. Chen Chong Xing took over the godly staff and was very surprised. Although Tang 36 had predicted this beforehand and warned him, he still didn't expect it. Tang 36 looked at him and coldly said, "You don't intend to explain?" Chen Chong Xing looked at him and said, "I just arranged to have a meal with someone. It's nothing major." "But you still can't say it?" "Yes." "Then who did you have a meal with?" "I also can't say." Chen Chong Xing was rather nervous, but when he thought about how he had sat across from Su Yurong and drank wine, he couldn't help but perk up the corners of his lips. Seeing this, Tang 36 sucked in a breath of cold air and said, "A woman?" Chen Chong Xing was very shocked and asked, "How did you see?" Tang 36 sneered, "Look at your face full of spring breeze and your 7 emotions. Only Xian Yuan Po wouldn't be able to see it." Chen Chong Xing was rather embarrassed and didn't know how to respond. 3 days at most." Tang 36 clenched his teeth and said, "I'll definitely be able to find out what's going on with you. You clearly just met Su Yurong, but you weren't captivated by her and instead went to meet with another girl. I'm really curious to see just how good that girl is." Chen Chong Xing was rather confused and also faintly unconvinced. He asked, "Why can't I meet with Su Yurong?" Tang 36 expressionlessly said, "Su Yurong will meet with you in private? Why don't you just tell me that you are Su Li's illegitimate child?" Chen Chong Xing thought about it and said, "If that's the case, then wouldn't Zhishyo have to call me brother-in-law?" Tang 36 heard this and laughed. Then he thought of something and his smile disappeared. He looked at Chen Chong Xing and said, "You actually learned to tell jokes, and it's really funny. You're really done for." Chen Chong Xing didn't understand and asked, "What?" Tang 36 looked at him sympathetically and said, "It seems that you really like that girl, or else your personality wouldn't have changed so much. What will you do in the future?" Chen Chong Xing laid on the bed, tossing and turning. Even when it was late at night, he still couldn't fall asleep. After the age of 10, other than the time when he first entered the capital to absorb starlight and purify, this was the first time he had insomnia. Tang 36's final words seemed to tear open the paper window, allowing the starlight to fall upon the snowy plains in his body, clearly illuminating all his thoughts. In the half-year since he left the garden of Zhou, he would often think of her, whether it was on the great banyan tree by the lake or among the boulders of the mausoleum of Zhou. But what he did not understand was, that kind of longing was longing for longing. Until today, when the white gauze fell from the bridge of helplessness and he saw her eyes, especially when he saw her in the small tavern, wrapped in a large cotton-padded jacket, taking small sips of wine and gnawing on a bone. Her appearance was different from the garden of Zhou, different from the legends, but it was incomparably real, so beautiful that it made one want to get close to her. As a result, this longing fell into reality, taking on real weight. Longing that was real and had weight was called lovesickness. Once it was lovesickness, it was naturally difficult to sleep. Chen Chongqing was a person who was slow in speech but quick in action. In any case, he couldn't sleep. Since he wanted to see her, he would go see her. Su Yorong had said to him that he could not let anyone know that they had known each other, so he could not go see her through normal channels, so he could only go see her in secret. He got up, put on his clothes, and floated out the window. Crossing the winter forest, he took out a key and opened the secret door on the palace wall that was well concealed by ivy. He walked in. He pushed the heavy door open a crack and gazed at the palace in the darkness. He was somewhat nervous, so nervous that the whistle he blew out was somewhat hoarse. He was a very well-behaved youth and very rarely did this sort of thing. Although he had secretly entered the imperial palace several times, the current situation was somewhat different from before. Last night, the Pope had officially announced to the entire continent that he was the successor to the orthodoxy, but now he was intruding into the imperial palace. If he was discovered, then it would truly be a major incident. The wind and snow slowly drifted through the air. The red walls and yellow eaves of the imperial palace were all painted white. The divine queen glanced at the snowflakes outside the window, and a mocking smile appeared on her lips. She said, "Do you know when people are the most daring?" The confluence of the north and south was right in front of them. Various matters suddenly increased. Mou was still accompanying the queen to deal with matters late into the night. She was already somewhat tired. Suddenly hearing this question, she froze for a moment before responding. She softly said, "When facing death? It's not wrong, but there's another situation, because of love." The divine queen looked at the dark palace outside the window and said, "Or perhaps because of lust." Snow danced in the sky and lights flowed. The imperial palace seemed like it was daytime, not night, so black objects were rather conspicuous. When Chen Chongqing saw the black goat slowly walk over from the snow-covered plaza, he felt a sense of gratefulness. He told the black goat why he had come. The black goat glanced at him, turned around and walked away. After some time, it raised its horn at a palace in front of it, then turned around and disappeared into the snowy night. The location of that palace was excellent. It was not very remote, but it was very quiet. Moreover, in the middle of winter, there were many green trees around the palace. It was very unusual. She was living here? It seemed that the rumors were true. The divine queen doted on her, even more than the princess of Ping. Then if the orthodoxy and the imperial court split in the future, and the pope and the divine queen fought, she would definitely help the queen. What should I do? Suddenly, he remembered the words she said in the tavern. He realized that this was indeed a problem. He could forget it for a while, but he couldn't not think about it forever. The wind and snow in front of the palace were a bit cold. At the beginning, his face was a bit hot, but now it gradually cooled down. It wasn't that his heart was cold, but that he needed to be calm. He came to see her, but he didn't move for a long time. He didn't have any intention of sneaking into the palace. He just stood there. After an unknown amount of time, a voice reached his ears. It was her voice. Why are you standing here?" He looked towards the source of the voice and saw that there was a window on the east side of the palace that was still lit. He walked over and saw her silhouette reflected by the light. She sat at the table in front of the window, holding a book in her hand. It was late at night, but she still hadn't slept. For some reason, perhaps it was the same reason he hadn't been able to sleep. "I wanted to see you," he said to her through the window. Su Yorong softly said from the window, "Didn't we just meet?" Chen Chongqing hesitated for a while, then said, "But I can't sleep." Su Yorong turned to look out the window, somewhat uneasy. She thought to herself, just what could have happened to make a person like him unable to sleep? It must be known that in the garden of Zhou, even if there were countless terrifying beasts hiding in the sea of grass around him, he could still very calmly enter the land of dreams. What happened? Nothing, it's just that I can't sleep thinking about you. Tonight, Su Yorong's name was An Hong. Chapter 532. Su Yorong stood by the window, listening to these words. She stared blankly for a very long time, not knowing what to say. In the plains of the unsetting sun, they had gone through life and death together, stood shoulder to shoulder, relied on each other, and even brushed off the snow. They had long since understood each other's intentions, but at the time, she did not know that he was that young Taoist boy from Xining village. After leaving the garden of Zhou, she had also thought about her promise to him, and prepared to break off the engagement. However, the Li Palace had announced to the world that the sword pool had reappeared and many people had seen those swords. After comparing them several times, she finally confirmed that he was him. Only then did she realize that fate toyed with people, playing such a joke on her. But what did this count for? As long as he was still him, it was fine. She clearly understood what she wanted. On the bridge of helplessness and by the beef rib pot, she had always been waiting for him to say something, but he had never said anything. It was already late at night when he inexplicably came to the window and said these inexplicable words. Fine, this truly was very similar to his path of the sword. Just like Wang Po's path of the blade, very straight. He had directly used these words to pierce through the paper window in front of her, bringing the situation back to before the divine path of the mausoleum of Zhou. Su Yorong stood up, looked at his figure through the window, and then pushed open the window. Snowflakes were swept in by the wind and fell on her face, a little cold. The earth dragons are burning too fiercely, so the room is a little hot. She looked at Chen Chongqing as if explaining why she had pushed open the window to meet with him, but not even she realized that this explanation was actually very cute. Chen Chongqing looked at her face. He did not notice the nervousness in this explanation and the cuteness that came with it, but he felt that she was very cute. When I was standing outside just now, I also felt a little hot, he very honestly said. It was currently the middle of winter. In the dead of night, the world was frozen and snowflakes danced in the air. How long have you been standing there? Su Yorong asked as she looked at the snow on his body. Chen Chongqing thought it over, then shook his head. I forgot. Su Yorong asked, why didn't you just come in? Chen Chongqing replied, I was afraid of disturbing your rest, and also, Schwanger should be here. I was worried that she would see and say something. Su Yorong asked, then do you want to come in now? Chen Chongqing said, no need, I came. Actually because I have something to give you. After saying this, he took off the string of stone beads on his wrist and very carefully broke it. Then he put his palm through the window and said, there are 10 of them. You choose 5. In truth, he had long forgotten whether or not he had reached some sort of agreement with her regarding the distribution of the treasures in the mausoleum of Zhou. However, he believed that since they had found the mausoleum of Zhou together, everything discovered in the mausoleum of Zhou should be divided in half, whether it was the having blade style or the 10 stone pearls. This is... Su Yorong's curious voice suddenly stopped. Raising her head to look at him, she said in disbelief, this is the 10 beside the mausoleum of Zhou? If it were any other cultivator, even a prefect of the orthodoxy like Ling Haijiwang, they would find it impossible to see anything wrong with these ordinary and unremarkable stone pearls, as these stone pearls truly did not give off any ripples of qi. However, she had begun comprehending the heavenly tome monoliths when she was 10-some years old, and she had even personally seen these heavenly tome monoliths in the garden of Zhou, so she could naturally sense that something was different. Yes. Chen Chongqing looked at her and said, the garden of Zhou has not disappeared. If you want to go back and take a look, I can take you in. He did not use the phrase, enter the garden of Zhou, but go back, because to him and her, the garden of Zhou was truly far too important. Upon hearing that the garden of Zhou had not collapsed and that he could still enter it as he pleased, Su Yorong was even more shocked. But the truly important thing was still the stone pearls in his palm. She looked at him and seriously asked, "You really want to give them to me?" Chen Chongqing looked back at her and seriously said, "Without you, I would have died long ago. How could I have found the mausoleum of Zhou, let alone the sword pool and these things?" Su Yorong thought it over, but did not carefully choose. She took 5 stone pearls from his palm and immediately placed them in the Tong Palace. She felt that Chen Chongqing's words were reasonable, so she very calmly accepted them. She seemed especially carefree and unperturbed, as if it was only right and proper and upright. What Chen Chongqing most admired and liked about her was precisely this sort of temperament. "Then I'll be leaving." In the snowy night, he entered the palace, the window was pushed open, he saw her, and he even gave her the stone pearls. Everything that needed to be done had been done, so he naturally had to embark on his return journey. As the saying goes, one comes in high spirits and returns when one's spirits are exhausted. A distinguished scholar's style could not be better than this, but he was a youth, not a distinguished scholar, so even though he said he was leaving, his feet did not move. Su Yorong said, "Go back first." Chen Chongqing grunted, but his feet still did not move. He only looked at her. She slightly turned around, as if she wanted to avoid his gaze, but in reality she was sticking her head out the window. As she got closer and closer, he became somewhat nervous. She reached out and brushed the snow off his shoulders, just like how she had brushed away the fallen leaves for him on the Divine Avenue. It was very relaxed, very calm, very familiar, very peaceful. The paper window had long since been pierced through and the window had been pushed open. It just needed a final confirmation. The action of brushing away the snow was confirmation. Chen Chongqing felt like his severed meridians were automatically mending themselves, his entire body brimming with the strength of life. He looked at her, his eyes glowing. Su Yorong did not meet his gaze. She looked towards a certain place in the snowy night. She still felt that her face was somewhat hot, so she softly said, "Tomorrow, I want to go to the Orthodox Academy to take a look." Chen Chongqing no longer hesitated. He turned around and walked into the snowy night. He was very sure that this time, he would definitely be able to fall asleep. At 5 in the morning, Chen Chongqing woke up. He took 5 breaths to calm his mind, then opened his eyes. He washed and dressed, then went to run by the lake. Calculating carefully, he had not even slept for 4 hours. Strangely, his spirit was very good. He did not have the usual dark circles on Tang 36's face, and his feet seemed to move like the wind. As time passed, more and more students came to run by the lake, but none of them were faster than him. From time to time, he would surpass them, and when the students saw that it was him, they hurriedly bowed. No matter how young he was still the principal, not to mention that he had confirmed his status as a candidate for Pope last night, so the students were even more respectful than usual. But he could not see the difference. He was even more patient and calm than usual, and he returned the bow. The breakfast in the small dining hall across the lake was golden millet porridge, but he could not tell the difference between it and normal millet porridge. Even when Xian Yuanpe took the mountain sea sword from the pile of firewood and flaunted it in front of him, saying that when he was cultivating last night, he had succeeded in drawing lightning to sharpen the sword. Chen Chongqing still could not tell the difference between the mountain sea sword and when he first left the sword pool in the garden of Zhou. In short, he was somewhat absent-minded, and his gaze would occasionally drift in the direction of the imperial palace. "Are you sick?" Tang 36 yawned and asked him. Chen Chongqing returned to his senses and looked at the 2 dark circles under his eyes. "I think you might be sick." Tang 36 angrily thought, "If I hadn't stared at you last night like I'm sick and ended up falling asleep in the snow because I was too tired, I wouldn't be in such a bad state." Chen Chongqing looked in the direction of the imperial palace because last night she said she would come, and he was waiting for her. He naturally wanted to share the story between him and Su Yorong with others, especially with his friends. Tang 36 was originally the best person to talk to, but Su Yorong had said that she did not want others to know, so he could only endure. After eating breakfast, he once again washed his face and rinsed his mouth, changed into a set of clean clothes, and then stood in front of the window, waiting. It was also because he was usually so particular about cleanliness that he did not attract the attention of the people of the Orthodox Academy. After some time, the cry of a crane came from the distance. He followed the cry of the crane, and in a short while, in the depths of the forest, he saw the white crane, as well as her riding it. Su Yorong was still wearing the large cotton-padded jacket from yesterday. It was not rustic at all, and just looking at it made one feel warm. It was probably because she did not want others to see her, so just like in the Garden of Zhou, she used the secret technique of South Stream Temple to make her appearance much more ordinary. Seeing her ordinary face, Chen Chongqing was not disappointed. On the contrary, he felt it to be even more intimate. Perhaps it was this intimacy that allowed him to find that feeling of casual conversation he had in the Garden of Zhou. He looked at the large cotton-padded jacket that made her seem especially cute, and after a moment of hesitation, he gathered up his courage and said a few words. "The smell of beef ribs is very strong. Do you want to change into a new set of clothes, or maybe wear mine first and I'll wash this for you?" Su Yorong froze, and then she truly became angry and embarrassed. She turned around and walked towards the white crane. Chen Chongqing came to his senses and felt that his actions were truly absurd. He hurriedly chased after her, then began to make gestures with his hands at the white crane. He and the white crane were old friends. Without waiting for Su Yorong to get close, it let out a cry and flew away. Su Yorong stood in the snow, stunned once more. Starting from 2 years ago, she could not understand why the white crane was so intimate with Chen Chongqing, and why it was so kind. "Just what did you do to it back then?" She looked at Chen Chongqing and asked, "Why is it so obedient to you?" This was the first time the two of them had discussed matters of their childhood. "When I was little, I mentioned it to you in letters, but you forgot." When Chen Chongqing thought of this matter, he felt rather uncomfortable, but then he thought of that matter from before, and all that discomfort transformed into unease. He said, "I misspoke just now, don't be angry. Just think about Tang Tang's words." The words he mentioned were naturally Tang 36's words that he was a pig. The white crane left and did not return. The snowy forest was deserted and empty. Snowflakes slowly drifted down. Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong held up umbrellas as they walked through the secluded forest of the Orthodox Academy. "Zhixiu and I live here." Chen Chongqing brought her to the edge of the forest and pointed at the nearby small building. Only after he said these words did he remember that she had come to the Orthodox Academy that night. She might even have seen the scene in the restaurant across the street. He explained, "Don't misunderstand. That day, it was Tang Tang who insisted on dragging me and Su Mo over. Su Mo used to be a student of the Li Palace Academy, 33rd on the proclamation of Azure Sky. You might have heard of him. Right now, he's with us." These words were very natural and also naturally carried the pride of a young man. It was like he was bragging about his achievements to her. Just then, a voice suddenly rose up from the winter forest. "I knew there was something wrong with you. No wonder that night, you didn't even dare to touch the hand of the girl in your embrace. It turns out you really did have a lover." A pile of snow suddenly parted from where the voice had come from and Tang 36 stood up. The next chapter will be at night. The exact time is unknown. Chapter 533. Tang 36's body was covered in snow. His face was pale and his dark circles were extremely heavy. He looked extremely tired. In the past 2 days, in order to uncover Chen Chongqing's secret, he had racked his brains, forgetting to eat and sleep. He had truly put in a lot of effort, even using 2 of the magical artifacts of the One Shui Tang clan, before finally being able to perfectly conceal his aura and catch Chen Chongqing in the act. Ha 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 ha! His proud laughter echoed in the winter forest. Then he walked in front of Chen Chongqing and stopped laughing. He said angrily, "Aren't you a bit too much? Why do you keep saying bad things about me to show off your nobility? I heard you mention my name a few times in the snow and none of it was nice. This umbrella is a bit weird." Tang 36's gaze moved down from the umbrella and looked at the couple. Once again, he became proud and laughed. "You haven't even solved the marriage yet, and you're already in the mood to walk in the snow with an umbrella. You have to know that the phoenix is very proud. If she knew that you found a girl, then..." He was prepared to use this to threaten Chen Chongqing and make him sign a series of unequal agreements. But when his gaze fell on the girl under the umbrella, he subconsciously stopped talking. He didn't know why, even though he had never seen this girl before. He felt she was familiar. The snow forest became strangely quiet. Tang 36 looked at the girl and his expression became more and more serious. The young girl was about 15 or 16 years old, in the prime of her youth. Her brows were delicate and ordinary. The cotton jacket she wore seemed ordinary, but it was actually the most expensive 13 silk cotton. Her eyebrows were like willow leaves, and it was obvious that she used the most extravagant Qi Li Xiang eyebrow pencil. Even the hairpin that seemed to be casually inserted in her hair, if he wasn't wrong, was more expensive than all the clothes and shoes Chen Chongqing had worn in his entire life combined. Of course, what caught his attention the most was the young girl's eyes. He originally wanted to mock Chen Chongqing's taste, but now he realized that the girl's taste and temperament were impeccable. Of course, the girl's taste and temperament and the nobility hidden in the details could only be seen by a noble young master like him. A young Taoist priest from the countryside like Chen Chongqing wouldn't be able to see through it no matter what. As the saying goes, casting pearls before swine. Who was this girl? Tang 36 thought about his distant relatives, his cousins, and the young ladies of all the noble families on the continent, but he couldn't find an answer. He suddenly felt a strong sense of unease and vigilance. He didn't know where Chen Chongqing got to know such a noblewoman. He was worried that Chen Chongqing would be deceived. "May I ask for Mrs. Chen Chongqing raised his umbrella and covered Su Yurong's head, then walked towards another part of the winter forest. When he walked past Tang 36, the two glanced at each other. There were countless hints of questioning and warning in their eyes. "Don't tell anyone about this. Don't worry, who am I?" Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong walked dozens of yards in the falling snow. Tang 36 was still smiling and waving his hand, maintaining the posture of saying goodbye. No matter if it was the curve of his lips or the width of his hand, they were all perfectly displaying the etiquette and knowledge of a noble young master. Su Yurong said softly, "This friend of yours is really a wonderful person." Chen Chongqing thought, where did this come from? Perhaps it was inexplicably wonderful? Tang 36 watched the figures of the two disappear into the depths of the snow forest. When he could no longer see them, he let out a sigh of relief. With some difficulty, he walked in front of a large tree and extended his hand to support it. Then, he began to burp incessantly. The frequency of his burps was much higher than when he spoke before. After a while, he truly calmed down, and his shocked emotions began to truly ferment. He let out a strange cry, hugged the tree in front of him, and began to complain about Chen Chongqing and himself. At this moment, Xian Yuanpo finished his morning exercise and walked out from the depths of the forest. He happened to see Tang 36 hugging the tree like a madman and couldn't help but be surprised. "Didn't you always say that I was very childish when I hit trees? Why did you come up with a tree trunk today?" Tang 36 hugged the tree and didn't want to let go. He whimpered, "Today was too embarrassing. What's wrong with doing one more embarrassing thing?" Actually, Chen Chongqing never understood what the name Su Yurong meant to the young men of the world. Although because of the marriage certificate and the friendship between Tang 36 and Chen Chongxing, Tang 36 didn't fall in love with Su Yurong like most of the young men in the world, such as the Demon King's son, but she was still Su Yurong. And what did he do? Like a naughty child, he hid in the snow and eavesdropped on other people's conversation. He talked bad about her behind her back. He didn't even have time to wash his face when he woke up in the morning. He didn't brush his teeth either. The dark circles under his eyes were so heavy. He had never felt so embarrassed in his life. He wanted to hug the tree and never let go. Suddenly, Tang 36 turned around and looked at Xian Yuan Po. They just met for the first time yesterday. How come they are traveling together today? And looking at them, although they purposely kept a fist's distance between their shoulders, there's something wrong with this purposeness. As he spoke, he stretched out his right hand and clenched it into a fist. He gestured in front of Xian Yuan Po and sneered, "What a pair of adulterers! Do you think you can hide from my eyes by pretending to be calm? Who do you think I am? Can't I see that you two are in love?" Xian Yuan Po didn't even know what happened. He felt that Tang 36 was very strange and said, "Are you crazy?" If it was a normal day, Tang 36 wouldn't let it go after hearing such a sincere comment. But right now, all his thoughts were on the young man and woman who just left. He looked at Xian Yuan Po and asked seriously, "Do you believe in love at first sight?" Xian Yuan Po said, "In the tribe, people usually get married after the first meeting. Does this count?" Tang 36 was speechless and asked back, "Do you think it counts?" Xian Yuan Po thought seriously and said uncertainly, "I think it should count." Tang 36 thought that this person was really hard to talk to. He left the forest and went to the little building. He pushed open the door and asked directly, "Do you believe in love at first sight?"